Hi, everyone. I'm Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot, and we're here with Keith Hunter. He's going to be talking about world cycles of destruction, as he calls it, and very curious to hear what he's got to say. I will probably be letting him sort of do a presentation. That's kind of our agreement, and then try to ask questions at the end. But I am withholding the right to sort of pause him and ask questions. So Keith, it's great to have you here on the show. What I like to do is basically have you give yourself a brief introduction for people that haven't seen my previous interviews with you. You've been on the show a lot in the past, but some people may still not know who you are. So if you don't mind.
As far as an introduction goes, I'm an independent researcher, and what I'm interested in, my main subject areas are what you might call sacred geometry, the ancient systems of measure that we use, calendar systems tied into things like the Mayan long count, the Aztec cycles, what you may think of as numerological connections between different megalithic structures on the Earth's surface at various places, the positioning of, say, secret military bases. And what I basically focus on in my work is decoding mythological stories that we've seen in the past from various classic writers, such as Ovid, Roman poet, the Greek mythologies. And what a lot of these stories deal in, they are allegorical stories that basically talk about planetary conjunctions at certain key points in history and how they are tied in to sudden global upheaval, right? This is one of the key factors that the ancients are looking at, right? They're looking at different planets lined up with certain constellations in the backdrops, and when they occur, they trigger disaster. Now, there are certain I could say numerological, I know it's got a bad rep, numerology as a word, but there are certain cycles, if you will, that we have, numerical intervals that are encoded in these mythological stories and tied into these calendar systems, like the Mayan calendar systems, like the Aztec systems and others as well. And they basically had a system of targeting centuries or even millennia, thousands of years in advance, the critical days of disaster when certain special conjunction patterns were present. And the mathematics involved in this, which seems purely, in some sense, an astronomical system, it is also the same kinds of mathematics which is applies to even the positioning of different megalithic structures upon the Earth, and also certain military bases upon the Earth as well, because they are essentially reconstructing the same system in secret, and they're looking at that. So what I wanted to do here then is reveal a great mystery. So you're in for an exclusive here, Kerry. You're the first person to get this presentation. The last interview we did was about, I think, 8 months ago, and I said to you back then that I'd made some great discoveries in targeting world age cycles, and I've put together a really good presentation here of slides. And what I'm going to be doing, what I'm going to be showing you, all of the viewers watching here, I'm basically going to be showing you how we have got scientific evidence that's been collected of sudden disruption to the Earth, either based on magnetic field reversals or sudden climate changes or meteor bombardment. We've got a lot of scientific evidence scattered throughout the geophysical record of certain disasters, okay? So I've looked at the times of these. I've then looked at various mythological stories or allegorical stories, such as from the Greek myths or even the parables of the Bible. I've looked at that to try to decode specifically what conjunction patterns the ancients appear to be telling us are associated with triggering these disasters. And then I've used astronomy software to basically go to the time periods when we've got these disasters based on the physical evidence and see if there are any conjunction patterns involving certain planets which appear encoded in these mythological stories. And then the final piece of the puzzle, I've looked at the calendar cycles, the Maya and the Aztecs, and I find a brilliant harmonization and targeting of certain conjunction patterns identified in myth that coincide with these periods of disaster, and they are brilliantly mapped onto it. So this is the great discovery. And what a lot of people out there are interested in, this whole idea of world age cycles, and, you know, especially this Nibiru's gonna get us, you know, whenever you can't stop hearing about that one, you know, and we're in the end times and all that. And what I find is this: when we look back at the past, we've obviously got a lot of people saying a lot of comets are associated with disaster, and people talk about signs in the sky, things like that. And they talk about these kinds of things coinciding with disaster. And a lot of the researchers that have looked into this area, people like Graham Hancock, like Klube and Napier, who've looked into, ancient myths and things like that associated with disaster. A lot of them, again, Velikovsky is another one, they seem to think that there are unknown comets that we haven't seen before, or different comets every time, which come into the solar system and cause disaster. This is not true. What I'm going to show you is that practically all these disasters that we have are associated with the known planets. And it is essentially one of the features of these conjunction patterns is that they activate the planets, the inner planets, especially Mercury and Venus, to develop cometary properties temporarily, long tails, etc. The comets that have been spotted in the past, which cause us disaster, are not unknown objects. They're the known planets, okay? They're the actual known planets. And I'm going to give you some very decisive dates here, because what I'm going to do is, there are certain mysteries that we're all really interested in, like the Exodus, Noah's flood, the destruction of, say, Sennacherib's army in the Bible, the precise date of the crucifixion, or Revelation 12 in the Bible. These are all associated, these are allegorical stories that are all associated, right, with very precise calendar dates, okay? Very precise dates where there were certain special conjunction patterns. And I'm going to give you those very precise dates. And when I've done this, when I've presented the information for this, I'm then going to turn my attention to the future. So that the final part of this presentation, I'm going to tell you what I believe is the conjunction pattern that will mark the end of our current world age. And this pattern is not too far into the future. It's close. It's not imminent, but it's within our lifetimes. Okay. And I'm going to give you the essential proof of this. And one of the things I'll show you is there are certain conjunction patterns which occur on a certain sequence, a regular basis, okay? So these patterns, when they occur, right, they appear to trigger disaster. And you can have multiple instances of the same patterns triggering disaster throughout history. And this pattern, this disaster conjunction, which is very close at hand, is actually a match to another pattern that we've had previously, which we've got the physical evidence for causes disaster. So that's ultimately what I'm going to give you. And I want to get into the slideshow presentation. It's going to, firstly, I want to just kind of briefly summarize some of the scientific data at key points in history, which we've got some physical disasters going on, quite sudden ones. And after that, I'm going to then reveal the great mystery conjunction, that the conjunction pattern that's in all the texts, it's in the Bible, it's in Ovid, Metamorphoses, Greek myths. I'm going to give you the mystery conjunction, which is the framework of the whole system, and show you how this is the conjunction pattern that was tracked by the Mayans and the Aztecs. And what they did was, because this has got a regular sequence to it, this specific pattern, this core alignment, what they did was they set up additional calendar systems anchored on instances of this core pattern to target variant disasters like Exodus, like Noah's flood, etc. So I'm going to begin the presentation, and then I've got to press this screen share button here, and it's the bottom. Let's just see if it comes through. Oh, here we go. Can read screen, add extension, entire screen, share. Do you see this slide here, Kerry?
Yes, we can see that.
It says global upheaval, scientific age, nice little meteor shower thing.
Yeah,
Okay.
I see, everyone sees what you see because we're both on the same technology, which is appear.in.
Okay, then. So I'm going to go through the scientific evidence first off, right? So let's go to the first one. This is a classic, the Younger Dryas period. Now, this is a climatic event from 12,900 years before present, right, to 11,700 years before present. Now, what it essentially is a sudden decline in temperature, okay? And it's close to the end of the last ice age. I'm just going to summarize this slide. It talks about the change was relatively sudden, taking place in decades, and resulted in the decline of 2 to 6 degrees Celsius and advances of glaciers and drier conditions. So we're talking about sudden drop in temperature and advance of glaciers. And this happened around about this 12,900 years before present, or 10,900 BC. And then we had this one here, the end of it, 11,700, right, BP before present. This is when we had like a reversal and a sudden uptick in temperature. And this is what this little graph is. I'm going to show you a close-up of the graph later on. But let's just stick to this 12,900 years before present date. This is associated with mass extinctions, all kinds of things. And generally speaking, we've got this temperature drop, which is very suddenly. But what could cause it? Well, some scientific research papers have come out, and one of them here talks about the Younger Dryas comet. A comet impact that smashed into the Earth would appear to be responsible. And it says here, the impact theory explains the megafauna extinction, a black mat across northern hemisphere, nanodiamonds, platinum, iridium, all these different things they're looking at. And so you've got some research papers and they're saying, hey, a comet, something sudden happened, 12,900 BC and caused it. Now, we also have other extreme activity. Another thing that happened the exact same period is a volcano. This is a super volcano called Lacher See, and it's near Bonn in Germany. And again, another research paper talks about this, and they talk about all these volatile elements, all this stuff blowing up into the atmosphere. And this is one of the diagrams I've added to the web. There's just primary details of the research paper here. This is a screenshot somebody did looking at the effects of it going off. And again, all seems to be dated to the same area. So you've got intense volcanic activity, a meteor shower, abrupt drop in temperature, all seemingly occurring over a few years. And then we've got I'm sure everybody knows this one, Göbekli Tepe. Now they're looking at archaeoastronomy. They're looking at this site in Turkey, which has seemingly made all the news lately. People like Robert Schocker, the geologist that looked at the Sphinx, I think he wrote a book about it. And you've got these other researchers, and they state here in this paper, Sweatman and somebody whose name I'll pronounce wrong, what they've said is, we have interpreted much of the symbolism at Göbekli Tepe. It's like a megalithic site. It's in Turkey, and they've put, by matching low relief carvings on some of the pillars at Göbekli Tepe to star asterisms, we find compelling evidence that the famous vulture stone is a date stamp, if you will, for 10,950 BC, plus or minus 250 years, which corresponds closely to the proposed Younger Dryas event, estimated at 10,890 BC. We also find evidence that a key function of Göbekli Tepe was to observe meteor showers and to record cometary encounters. Indeed, the people of Göbekli Tepe appear to have had a special interest in the Taurid meteor stream, the same meteor stream that is proposed as responsible for the Younger Dryas event. So this is what they're looking at. They've got a site here where somebody appears to have encoded in stone that they're interested in meteor showers. They're interested in this stuff as if they were almost recording it or even tracking it. But let's go further to the end point of the Younger Dryas period. This again is a Wikipedia page, and this is where the whole thing reverses. we had the event start around about 12,900 before present. The period lasts about 1150 to 1300 years, as you can see here. And the measurements, oxygen isotopes, they mark the end of the Younger Dryas. On the one hand, it said it took place over just 40 to 50 years, each in discrete steps. But then there were other data, such as dust concentration, snow accumulation, suggesting an even more rapid transition, which required about 7 degrees of warming in just a few years. And they look at Greenland in particular, total warming in Greenland, 10 to 4 degrees, in terms of its 10 degrees plus or minus 4 degrees in terms of its sudden reversal in increase in temperature. Now, this table here you can see in the bottom left is from Wikipedia, and all I did basically was I added up all these 5 years, divided by 5, and you get the average of 11,562 years. And the actual standard, when they talk about before present here, the standard is actually from 1950 AD. So we get this date here, 9612 BC, as when the Younger Dryas appears to end. Suspiciously close to the Atlas thing as well. Now this is the calendar, the graph that I just showed briefly in a small section at the top left. So the 10,900 BC is this bit here. It's already shot up a bit. It's come back down, and it's about here, and then it suddenly drops. This is the Greenland sample. And then it seems to go sideways a little bit up and then rockets up. And this is 9612. And then it does this and then trails off. And this 0 at the bottom, this is where we are right now. This is present times. So this is what happened. All this here was this was like the Ice Age, this part here, very lower temperatures. So this is all temperature graph stuff. So we've got here 2 little disasters here. Now let's look at another one. This is from Uriel's Machine, Christopher Knight and Robert Lomas. This is their book. I've got it on my bookshelf. And they look at various evidence of a few meteor strikes, which appear to be at different dates a bit further into the future. This is an image, a snapshot image of something from one of their books. And they're talking about scientific studies of tektites. They're like smooth, glassy, greenish kind of rocks. And they appear to be evidence of like intense heat and a meteor, bombardment here. So the first line is, and these are direct quotes, it's 1970 tektites were found embedded in fossilized wood in Australia, which was carbon dated and found to have an age of 9,520 plus or minus 200 years BP. Now, this part here, if you go to the bottom of the screen, we've got here the 7 impact sites of 7640 BC after Tolman. They're talking about a group of researchers that looked into this and came with a refined date. It's a Tolman, I think it's an husband and wife team, 7640 BC. And they found evidence of a general meteor bombardment all over the world round about that time. Now, we then go on to something else quite interesting. This is the 7th millennium BC event. Now, here we've got something kind of similar going off as at the start of the Younger Dryas period. We've got some geophysical activity, disruptive stuff occurring in different parts of the world. So we've got the English Channel being formed, and this is about circa 6500 BC. They also talk here about various peoples, civilization stuff as well. And then we've got this volcano, and this is located southeast. It's off a certain like island, group of islands that trail off Russia. And this was a massive volcano, and they've dated this quite accurately, 6440 BC plus or minus 25 years. And this is the Kuril volcano. It's on the Kamchatka Peninsula. And they've got this VEI 7 eruption. This is the scale, basically. And I'll just get into that in a moment. And then they've also got circa 6400 BC, Lake Agassiz. This is in North America, where you are. And they're talking about draining into the oceans for the final times, leaving lakes Manitoba, Winnipeg, Winnipegosis, and the Lake of Woods, among others in the region, as its remnants. Okay, so I'm sure those lakes are familiar to people in America. So you've got things happening in America, you've got things happening over in Europe, and you've even got things in Russia. And this volcano index, let me just show you what I mean. It says it's number 7 in in its eruption power. This is the volcanic explosivity index, VEI index. Number 7 is right here, just next to number 8. It's classed as a supercolossal volcano, and these occur roughly every 500 to 1,000 years. Okay, so the next classification up is something that occurs every 50,000 years. So this is an immense volcano, a really active volcano, you know, really massive disruption to the Earth with its eruption at that time period. And if you go further to it, we get another event. This is called the 5.9 kilo year event. That's 5,900 years before present, or as you can see here in blue, 3,900 BC. This is associated with an incredible level of, you know, aridization, things getting really, really dry, you know, as it's the aradification, the desert-like, sudden temperature increases, you know, things getting really dry, and it triggers human migration to like low-lying areas, only rivers and what have you. And if you go forwards here, they talk about it, and one of the interesting things as well, when they're discussing it, they basically say, you know, events like this usually have a kind of a quick recovery, but in this case, it was actually one which did not recover quickly at all. It was only like a partial recovery once it happened. But it was a very intense, again, a sudden effect. We'll next go to another, this is back to Uriel's machine. This is a passage from the book. And I've already mentioned the 7640 BC date here, meteor strike. Pretty much a bombardment in different places of the globe. But they also go on to say, you know, we've got evidence in the magnetostratigraphical record. It's disruptions to the Earth magnetic field. The scientists model this over time, and what they found is that there are these spikes, these blips going upwards, and they're associated with both the 7640 BC event and also 3150 BC event. So they've got the same kinds of evidence and saying, well, if that one there is a great big cometary disaster, then we should have had something significant here. And this is what they found. Now, they go on in this book to talk about the connection to Enoch and this day. I'm not interested in that myself, but they do have physical evidence of some sort of meteor impact, 3150 BC. And they talk about a Professor Ioannis Laritsis of the University of Rhodes. And he came with his own independent evidence of a cometary impact in the Mediterranean Sea around this time. So again, it's a very specific dating, and they've got 3150 BC. Now we move on next to this. Comet impact in AD 536. Well, this is the start of the Dark Age period, you know, when the Roman Empire collapsed and we had things put on hold. We had massive changes civilization-wide. And so they're looking at dendrochronological, that's tree ring evidence, basically. And they found there appears to be some sort of sudden climatic event, 536 AD. And they, again, let me show you this next one. There's the graph showing the particular dip here. You can see. And again, they're talking about changes in temperature, very, very sudden, and it's all tied into the tree ring data. You've even then got the thunderbolts of the gods. They talk about a plague 562 AD. And again, they talk about an electromagnetic drama. They're thinking this is something to do with the planets, that kind of thing. That's for the road they're going. And so they give this following passage from an essay on their website, URL at the bottom. And they talk about this plague 562 AD, raged for 52 years, really virulent, really bad. And so they've got this kind of date. So next we go to the Middle Ages. This is from a book called The Cosmic Winter by Victor Clue and Bill Napier, 1990, 1345 AD. And this is a quote from Person, you know, essentially writing at the time. I think it was a monk in a monastery, you know, they would have laid it out in the year of our Lord, Anno Domini, 1345. The quote is, between Cathay and Persia there reigned a vast rain of fire, falling in flakes like snow and burning up mountains and plains and other lands with men and women. And then arose vast masses of smoke. And whosoever beheld this died within the space of half a day. And again, they go on to talk about worldwide cooling. Now, over here in Europe, this particular time period is well associated with the Black Death, the bubonic plague. Again, it's more plague stuff like in the Dark Ages, the mid-6th century here. So I think it's between either, depending on estimates, some people say a third, some people say half the population of Europe was wiped out between about 1347 and 1351 or so, in particular, for these few decades. But that was the main concentration, those 7 years or so. And we had harvests, and again, the immediate cause was this fire from the sky. It was from the heavens. It was something that disrupted all the crops and everything, that caused the disaster. So it wasn't just some plague happening in nowhere in China or whatever. And they did. China, I think, lost 10 million people or something. They got a massive death toll over there as well. The Orthodox history says some people from China got on some ships, came all the way to Europe, and then passed it on to us. And it was just something like that. They ignore the fire from the sky bit, but it's quite crucial to look at it. So the Black Death, this is one of the paintings there, and they talk about it, 1347 to 1351. So let me summarize then. Here's a nice little table of all the things we've just seen. I've used the date here from Göbekli Tepe cometary bombardment. Younger dry send, that's the ice core sample average. The Tolman value here, 7640 BC. And then we've got the flooding, subseismic activity. That's the date for the volcano, the Russian volcano blowing up. Sudden intense aridification, 3900 BC. Comet strike, 3150. This one here is actually an average of the 536 and 562 dates for the comet strike. And then we've got the very precise date, 1345, the fire in the sky event. So here we have them all listed. Now, ladies and gentlemen, all you viewers out there, what you are looking at here, you're looking at this nice little list. Would it surprise you to know that every single one of these events has the exact same cause? The exact same cause, a conjunction pattern. The very same conjunction pattern triggered all of these events. Now, it is a conjunction pattern which is mentioned in a lot of books, and here are a few from my bookshelf. The top one here, top left, Ovid's Metamorphoses, talks about the Greek pantheon of gods, all of their exploits, encoding essentially planetary changes. Homer's The Odyssey, that's the account of Odysseus coming back from the Trojan War. Got Plato, that's the Timaeus is the one where he mentions Atlantis. We've then got the Popol Vuh. I think that means council book, I believe. It's the book looking at the legends of the Mayans, the American Indians. Hamlet's Mill is a book where you've got this Giorgio de Santillane and Hertha von Deschend, and they are looking at evaluating a lot of the myths in these here. Berossus and Manetho, these lived about I think it's the 4th century BC. One's a Chaldean, another one is an Egyptian. They've got some important quotes. I'm going to show one from Berossus about alignments. The Corpus Hermetica, that talks about world age cycles. The Nag Hammadi, this is a book, basically in 1945 in Egypt, quite by chance, somebody unearthed some like jars, some like pottery jars hidden away, and they contained all these manuscripts from various mystery traditions. Some of them were additional gospels for the Bible. Others were Egyptian documents. They even had a copy of Plato's Republic in there, so that's why it's called a library. It's not a particular religious focus as such. It's many different documents. We've got the Gnostic book called the Pistis Sophia. That means faith, wisdom. This is additional stories by Jesus, which contain very important encoded elements. There's a lot of stuff that Jesus taught, which is not in the Standard Bible, and this is one of the most important books regarding it. And then we've got the Bible itself. Some of the most brilliant and sophisticated stories in mythology are in the Gospels and in Revelation, and I'm going to get into that. So in some of these books then, this pattern which is responsible for triggering that disaster that you, well, all those disasters I've just listed there, right? They're associated in particular with a special conjunction pattern of planets and also a very special little compact star group. And I'm going to give you the star group right now. Here's a snapshot from Starry Night, the astronomy package I use. The Pleiades star group. There it is, little arrow pointing towards it. Now, it's not a constellation, all these other things you see here, these like Taurus, Perseus, Aries, Pisces, they're all constellations, widely scattered. The Pleiades is a group of stars just beneath the Perseus constellation and above Taurus. And here's a nice close-up of it, sometimes called the Seven Sisters. Now, this particular group of stars is very closely matched up with or associated with this disaster configuration. Now, what I'm going to do then, because I've created some diagrams here, I'm just going to show all the viewers watching this, I'm going to give you a diagrammatic representation of exactly what the disaster conjunction is. I'm just going to show you straight out, and then I'm going to explain it. This is the core disaster pattern, which was responsible for triggering all those listed events that we saw. And what it is, in diagram form, is you get a very accurate alignment of Mars, Venus, the Sun, and Mercury in that order when the alignment is targeting close to the galactic center area here. This is the Milky Way band. It's close to the galactic center area. And at the same time as that alignment's going off there, the Earth is aligned with the Sun and the Pleiades. So you're going to have the Sun, the Earth, and then the Pleiades in that order. Now, the Earth is not always very accurately mapped to the Pleiades. It's not always perfectly in alignment. It can be significantly, several degrees either way, even 15 degrees or so, stuff like that. But there is a certain mapping. It's that the real core of the issue is this alignment here, especially of Mars, Venus, the Sun, and Mercury, which have got to be very accurate, and they target this area. And so what you get, though, simultaneously when that happens, you're also on the lookout for the Earth being in close conjunction with the Pleiades, in between the Sun and the Pleiades. Now, I'm going to summarize very carefully because I've done a very intense mathematical analysis. So we're going to ask ourselves the question, if that's the pattern, how often does it occur? What's the frequency of this pattern? Well, it has a kind of an irregular cycle. And I took the astronomical values, the orbital period values for all the planets you see from the US Naval Observatory, and also adjusted them for precession, because the targeting of the conjunction is to background star groups. So you have to take into account precession. That's kind of crucial. So from a pure mathematical analysis, this pattern has the following frequency. It has a complete cycle every 4,497 years. And these are sidereal years. And you see at the bottom, 1 year is 365.256363 days. That's the standard sidereal year that you get from US Naval Observatory. That's the year it takes for, say, a conjunction of, say, the Sun, the Earth, and any given faraway background star. It's different from a tropical year by 20 minutes, okay? So every 4,497 years, we get this alignment where you have the galactic center, Mercury, Sun, Venus, Mars lined up, and you also got the Sun, the Earth, and the Pleiades. But within this primary cycle, there are 4 sub-intervals, okay? So if you started out with the alignment, right, of this configuration, then you'd get it to occur again after 1,183 years. Then it'd occur next after 1,343 years. Then it'd occur again after 1,183 years. And then it'd occur after only 788 years. And if you add all those 4 up, you've completed 4,497 years. And you're right back at the beginning. So it's kind of an irregular cycle, okay? So let me show you then. I went into an astronomy package and basically said, okay, we've got the mathematical analysis here, the abstract one based purely upon analyzing the orbital periods. So what I want to do now is map this in time, okay? Look at the actual history of when this configuration here has occurred in history, map it, and I went forwards in time a little bit and also backwards in time. And this is what you get. You can see here, this is the diagram, and here are all the intervals, that repeating sequence of 4 sub-intervals mapped there, and these are the calendar years, just in BC and AD. So you can see then if we have, say, this one here, 5124 BC, the next one after that's 3941 BC, and in between them is 1183 years. That's the time interval between them. So you can see how they're offset. If you just pick any two dates, the value here in the blue columns is the interval. So that is the actual real mapping of the planetary, conjunction as you get here. So the next thing I have to do is, I'm going to show you all these dates are here of this conjunction, tabled and mapped against all those disaster dates I showed you previously. And if you do that, you get the following. Going back in time, the last time this pattern occurred was precisely in 1345 AD. And I've gone back 12 instances of this pattern, back to the end of the last ice age. Out of 12 instances, we have a match to those disasters. 8 of them involve disasters, and they are the 8 that I've listed. So they're all matched in orange. So for example, cometary bombardment event, that's the Göbekli Tepe date. When this special conjunction pattern occurred here, it was 10,964 BC, only a 14-year difference. Younger dry ascent from the ice core samples, 9612 BC. When this conjunction pattern occurred, 9621, 9 years difference. We have a gap here. We don't have that kind of intense physical evidence seeming to record anything happening there. Then we have the next one. The Tolman date, 7640, cometary bombardment, 7650 when the pattern occurred, only a 10-year difference. The Russian volcano blowing up, along with the other events, that was the flooding from the lakes and the English Channel. But I've used the Russian volcano date here, so it's 6440, 6467, 27-year difference. Again, we've got a gap. We don't have the physical evidence of any intense disaster there. Then we get to the next one, intense aridization. This is where we have the sudden desert-like conditions appear. 3900 BC, here, 3941 BC. Comet strike, 3150 BC, very nicely dated. When this pattern occurred again, 3153, only 3 years difference. We don't have any intense evidence of a, cometary bombardment or anything for these 2 dates here. Then we move forwards into the modern era. 557 AD is when the alignment took place, just the beginning of the Dark Ages. And then we've got that average, 549 AD. That's the average of the 536 and the 562, about 8 years difference. And then we've got a perfect match because we've got the guy in the monastery saying 1345 dead on, and the match is perfect on that one. So we've only got these small little differences here. And we don't have, a complete picture of disaster for these gaps here. But I will say this much. When I get on to start talking about these disasters, Kerry, I'll tell you that the disasters sometimes are more intense than other times. And we don't always get massive disasters or we don't always get a disruption, which gives us necessarily the kinds of physical evidence which is recorded. So I think that the effects were more mild at these dates in blue here, but there was still something happening. But this is essentially what we've got here. So that core pattern right there is the pattern which would appear to be associated with these disasters, which of course brings us on to the next point, and I'm sure all the viewers are really wondering. What have I really done here when you look at these 2 things here is I've got a certain a certain conjunction pattern. I've got all the dates here, and then we've got a lot of cometary bombardments and geophysical disruption to the Earth. So the question on everybody's minds is no doubt, how do you get conjunction patterns somehow triggering meteor bombardments? Well, let's have a look. Comets and conjunctions, okay? Now we're going to get into some of the exotic effects that scientifically wise, we know these effects occur. Okay, so this is what I'm going to start talking about. We've launched a lot of probes, to look at a lot of comets in the recent period, and we kind of know that they have some very unusual effects. So here's another one. This is the Rosetta Unravels formation of sunrise jets. This is actually, going along the whole, quote, electric universe theory. But what they're basically saying is when you get these comets, when they get near to the sun, they develop these tails and they develop a coma, and it's like an electrical effect. And just by the sun hitting these comets, you get these really weird streams here. You get sudden outbursts of gas and dust, right, which can occur. They can really fly off the comets. And this is what they're describing here with regards to the interactions that take place between comets and, you know, the sun itself. When developing cometary tails as a general broad thing that can go many millions of miles into space, you also have these sudden eruptions and jet streams coming off. Here's a close-up of some of the effects coming off here. And we even have another snapshot. Right, there's an eruption coming off the bottom here. And what a lot of these researchers say, especially the people who've looked into this at the Thunderbolts project, you know, they basically talk about how obviously a comet is a material body and it has a certain gravitational field, but electromagnetic forces, electromagnetism is far more powerful than gravity. And what you get seemingly are electromagnetic hotspots appearing around the comets at certain locations, and they can blast off material debris from various points of the comet, you know, in addition to it having its like general coma effect. So you get that kind of electromagnetic hotspot thing coming across from it. So that's one of the things that they're actually looking at. Now here's another effect that we have. This is a comet called P17 Holmes, and there it was minding its own business in 2007, small little object, and suddenly it erupted and was the center focal point for a massive sphere of light, which came off the comet and expanded to greater than the size of the sun. Okay, greater than the size of the sun by naked eye, went right into the visible spectrum, and then it faded back into invisibility. But even then, 5 months after it erupted, using these infrared comets, we've still got something massive going on. This is the NASA Spitzer Space Telescope looking at it. So we know we can get some pretty exotic things going off with comets that we've observed. And this brings us next to look at one of the more intriguing figures of the 20th century that's looked into comets and disasters, and that's Immanuel Velikovsky, author of Worlds in Collision, which came out in 1950. So a lot of people have looked then at his work, and he talks about Venus being a comet, amongst other things. Here's an article that somebody just wrote about him. You know, it's by David Talbot, and he's just summarizing some of the things that Velikovsky came up with. He looked at a lot of ancient records, and Velikovsky contended, and I've highlighted a few things in the red here, that the planet Venus, just a few thousand years ago, possessed a spectacular comet-like tail, and its orbit intersected that of the Earth. And this is what he thinks is responsible for, you know, the Exodus event, plagues of Egypt, and also certain disasters associated with the 8th and 7th centuries BC. And he even talks about the planet Mars as well. Now, I would have to say, in looking at Velikovsky's work, my personal view is, you know, I disagree with him on quite a few things. And the main point is, Velikovsky thought Venus was like a recent entrant into our solar system. So it was way outside the solar system. You know, it was captured just a few thousand years ago, and it initially was like a comet, massive tail, and then it settled from an elliptical orbit into its currently near circular orbit. And also, he looks at the planet Mars and says, well, Mars is the next planet out from the Earth, about 1.5 times the distance from the sun as the Earth. And he says that, again, Mars currently very close to circular orbits, only slightly elliptical. He thought that something happened to disrupt its orbit, and it went very, very elliptical, so much so that they were crossing through the Earth's orbit itself. And he thinks this occurred for Venus, and this occurred for Mars. Now, my thing about Velikovsky is, I do not think any of these things happened. I do not think we need to suggest that the planets had radical changes to their orbital paths to achieve these effects. And I don't think Venus is a recent entrant into the solar system at all. I think it's been in the Earth for millions or billions of years, like the Earth, essentially. And what I think is actually going on is, when we have these special conjunctions, they trigger an effect, a resonant agitation of the solar system. They trigger the planets to develop temporarily cometary properties. So Venus, like, for example, could flare up, much like Comet P17 Holmes. It flares up. It then develops a long cometary train. And we know from observed comets right now, cometary tails, just from small objects, can go tens of millions of miles into the, away from it, extend away from it. So imagine if like Venus became a comet. So let me just show you this little scenario here. There's the Earth. We've got Mercury, Venus, and Mars. So they're kind of lined up. Let's say that triggers Venus to become a comet. Well, cometary tails always point away directly from the sun. The mean distance of Venus from the sun is about 67 million miles. Mean distance of the Earth is about 93 million miles. It's about 26 million miles, which is nothing. So if the planets are all going anti-clockwise and Venus has got a cometary tail like that, it's not going to be too long before we get that going off, okay? We're going to like plow through the cometary tail, okay? And the other thing as well is, remember I was talking about the small comets developing electromagnetic hotspots and having eruptions and material blasted off into space? Well, you've got to think about everything scaled up. Venus is an astronomical body, of course, very large. It's just only slightly less than the size of the Earth. So imagine if Venus became a comet and developed cometary properties, a massive great tail, and electromagnetic hotspots started to pop up all over its planet's surface. You would get significant sized fragments blasted off the surface of the planet. And as I said, everything's scaled up. Electromagnetism is far more powerful than gravity. And those blasted off fragments could be several hundred, feet in diameter or greater. They will blast off and achieve escape velocity easily, with electromagnetism overcoming the gravity field of Venus. And so if that happens, then we get all kinds of debris sprayed away from Venus, say, and then the Earth can get a significant meteor bombardment if they happen to strike the Earth, and the damage will be different every time. This is why when you look at that 1345 event, we've got some kind of fire in the sky. It almost seems to suggest we got caught up in the fringes of small little particles when nothing massive hit us. 3150 BC, we got this significant sized chunk. It pierced maybe just one single, hit in the Mediterranean. 7640 or 50 BC, that's when we got a bombardment. And again, in 10,964, a significant bombardment. It's different every time. You can't always know how much of a hit we're going to get, what pieces of debris are going to hit us, how big they are. So the damage is kind of different every time from a cometary perspective. But then you've got to think on again about the conjunctions. Let's have a nice quotation here from Berosus, one of the guys I mentioned previously. So Berosus, he's a priest of Bel, Marduk, who interpreted the prophecies of Bel, attributes these disasters, the end of the world and its aftermath, to the movements of the planets. He is so certain of this that he can determine a date for the conflagration and the great flood. He maintains that the Earth will burn whenever all the planets, which now have different orbits, converge in Cancer and are so arranged in the same path that a straight line can pass through all their orbs, and that there will be a further great flood when the same planets so converge in Capricorn. For under the sign of Cancer occurs the change to summer, under Capricorn the change to winter. They are seasons of great power occurring when there are movements in the change of season. Now, Cancer and Capricorn are constellations as well, let's not forget. Some of the alignments I'm going to show you, they're very closely related to these constellations in the backdrop, okay? So Berosus is talking about flooding and fire as a result of conjunctions. And you may wonder, it's not obvious, and I didn't think about it straight away, but when you're looking at this quote, he talks about the planets arranged really closely so you can have a straight line, pass between them. What he does not say, he does not insist that the sun must be a part of these conjunctions. No. You can get conjunctions that are direct between several planets, which do not involve the sun. A lot of these disaster alignments do not involve the sun. Now, let's just have a look at my own book here, Occult Physics. There we go, it's me. I deal with all these subjects in my book, and I want to just draw your attention to this chapter here called The Secret Physics of Gravity. So this is where I want to get into the whole concept of resonance. So in my book, in this chapter here, I talk about some of the theories about gravitational fields, looking at guys like, geniuses like Boscovich from the 18th century, extending the work of Isaac Newton, some of the quantum mechanics stuff, and even mentioned Standeo. And in my book, I give the following little diagram of a gravity field. And this is very much via the work of Standeo. And what happens is this. Space itself, it's not empty. It's got, it's got mass, it's got substance to it. And it's also got resistance. And when you look at the sun then, you've got many material layers, kind of nested layers going inwards beneath the sun. And you've got lots of rotation going off. And so the sun's spinning around really fast and doing all of this. And what it's doing is it's pushing out space. And you're getting compression waves push out from the sun. But because space has resistance, it'll compress, space as much as it can at a certain outer limit as you get here. And then there'll be a bounce back. And so the waves will reflect back. And so if you've got waves going outwards and waves coming back inwards, you basically set up these standing wave pressure patterns. And so you'll have localized gravity wells. And this is basically what you have, where, say, a planet here will be at point B. This could be the sun, say, this mass here, this A. And you've got a pressure wave reflecting back to create these different gradients. And so these like localized gravity wells, if you will. A planet would be here and it would be fixed. It couldn't move too far because there's like an anti-gravity effect pushing it that way, and then there's a gravity effect pushing that way. It's like a resistance versus attraction, R versus A. So it settles into this orbit here. And again, on these peaks here, planets can't settle. They have to fall into these gravity wells, so you could get another planet at D here. So this is just a simple two-body, a two-gradient thing, where the planets, just like in quantum mechanics, the electrons have only got certain orbits. They can't orbit everywhere in a continuous, distance from the nucleus of an atom. It's the same with the planets. So these waves here are established by the rotation of the sun, but all the planets themselves produce their own rotational motions and their own waves that spread out and come back again. And so when the ancients refer to this concept of the music of the spheres, that's what they're referring to, these kind of pressure waves in space. So if you get certain conjunction patterns then establish themselves, this is where I believe these waves, they match up and harmonize and they stack on top of one another, and you have a resonant agitation of the solar system. There's kind of a turbulence created with the waveform patterns. And this is, again, resonance is a physical effect well known in the sciences. It's just that people don't like to say that it applies into the celestial realm because they don't want to say music of the spheres, these academics, and look like they're siding with mystical stuff. But it would appear that quantum mechanics stuff, that area, the effects there apply in the macroscopic realm. And so if you get conjunction patterns, it's my contention that you get an interaction of the waveform patterns here, okay? And they trigger a resonant agitation. So all the planets start to shake in their orbits. They are heavily constrained. The planets do not suddenly get highly elliptical orbits. No, they're heavily constrained due to these gravity wells they're in, but they do start to shake. You can get the Earth's axis start to topple suddenly. It can slow down, speed up on its axis. Its plates can shake. That kind of effect can occur. But what I find when I look at the solar system is we have long-term trends, say to the length of the Earth year. It's just under 365.25 days. There are subtle long-term changes to that going off. And the same with the distance between the moon and the Earth. Subtle long-range trends, every year the moon might move away from the Earth a couple of centimeters, that kind of thing. Well, what I tend to find is if we have this disruption to the Earth, an agitation to its axial orientation, if it deviates to its 23.5 degrees, suddenly drops, it'll, after the disruptions occurred and the conjunctions pattern is basically, lost, you achieve a conjunction pattern and then the planets move on past it. So you have a temporary agitation. If you've had a disruption to the Earth's axial orientation or speed, they will tend to return back to where they were before and then go back to these long-term trends. okay? And you don't get massive changes in the elliptical orbits of the planets. What you do get, though, is an agitation of the planets in place, constrained in their orbits, and you get these exotic effects like cometary tails occurring. Now, which leads us to this next little slide here. This is from the Nag Hammadi text, and this is a line also, because there's a little other effect that we need to look at. And this again is mentioned in mythology, an exotic effect, the sun appearing to change its color and go dark. This is another weird feature. When people talk about these conjunctions occurring, they're not just talking about weird comets. They're saying, like, where's the sun? Everybody's looking around. Where's the sun gone? There's no eclipse, but where's the sun? This again appears to be one of these really weird features of it. So here's from one of those books from the Nag Hammadi library on the origin of the world. And in red I've highlighted, before the consummation of the age, the whole place will shake with great thundering, and the rulers will be sad. There's a few fragments missing here, yeah. The angels will mourn for their mankind, and the demons will weep over their seasons, and the mankind will wail and scream at their death. Then the age will begin, and they will be disturbed. Their kings will be intoxicated by the fiery sword, and they will wage war against one another, so that the earth will be intoxicated with bloodshed, and the seas will be disturbed by those wars. Then the sun will become dark, and the moon will cause its light to cease. The stars of the sky will cancel their circuits. What a very interesting statement. When we talk about resonance, when we talk about the stars, the planets are often called the wandering stars. So here we talk about them cancelling this. It's like an electrical type thing, like electrical circuitry, waveform patterns cancelling one another out. And again, we've got a great clap of thunder will come from all the force that is above all the forces of chaos. And which brings me to this next little citation. This is from the Pistis Sophia, the apocryphal teachings of Jesus. Now, in this book, Jesus talks about all these different levels of reality, higher dimensions and so forth. And they all start with the ineffable or the Godhead. And then you get them all created down to the world of matter. And then the lowest realm, or the furthest removed from the ineffable, is called the outer darkness. And so Mary asks Jesus about the outer darkness as a realm, if you will. She says, "My Lord, doth the dragon of the outer darkness come into this world, or doth he not come?" The Saviour answered and said unto Mary, "When the light of the sun is outside above the world, he covereth the darkness of the dragon. But if the sun is below the world, then the darkness of the dragon abideth as veiling of the sun, and the breath of the darkness cometh into the world in form of a smoke in the night. That is, if the sun withdraweth into himself his rays, then indeed the world is not able to endure the darkness of the dragon in its true form. Otherwise would it be dissolved and go to ruin with all." The outer darkness is stated to be a dragon swallowing its own tail. It's like a waveform pattern reflecting back on itself, what scientists call like destructive interference, cancelling itself out. And so we're talking about the sun's waves cancelling themselves out. So the sun can quite literally, temporarily, switch off as a visible emitter of light at the point when these conjunction patterns are established. The waves develop coherency. They all stack up in terms of the wavelengths next to one another, and they all develop a pure color, and they can shift through the red end of the spectrum as the sun goes temporarily dark. This is one of the effects that appears to be associated with these times of upheaval. So we're not just talking about cometary effects being triggered temporarily, planets being agitated. Again, this is a waveform pattern, what the ancients call the music of the spheres. And so we can even have light being a waveform event. We can have that occur as well. So here's just a brief summary of all these weird effects that appear to be triggered by special conjunction patterns. We can have simultaneous resonant agitation of all the celestial bodies within the solar system, simultaneously across the board. And the effects may include temporary disruption to the axial rotation speed and or orientation of the axis of the planets, heightened seismic activity planet-wide. Number 2, the ignition or energetic activation of the inner planets to develop cometary properties, Effects may include long cometary tails temporarily established, significant chunks of matter blasted off into space from electromagnetic hotspots that develop on the surface of the bodies. That's what causes the meteor showers. Then we've got number 3. The light waves of the sun develop coherency and via destructive interference cancel one another out. This may cause the sun to change color, with its light waves shifting outside of the visible spectrum so as to temporarily cause the sun to go dark. Now note, no radical changes to the orbits of the planets are required to achieve these effects. That's where I part company with Velikovsky. Okay, so now we have the next point, the analysis. Okay, I'm now going to start looking at the calendar systems of the ancients, very specifically with regard to this core pattern, and I'm going to start to give you some very precise dates when these alignments were present. Now, in order to do this, I just need a little bit of digression and to tell everybody, because I want people to be able to reconstruct my work here. So I'm going to be giving you precise calendar dates and screenshots of conjunctions from Starry Night. And I want you to be able to, anybody who's got the software, to be able to plug in the same dates and see what I see. So I need to tell everybody about the Julian day number system. Just this nice little slide here, okay? We're familiar with calendar dates, like you can see here, just on the left. We've got January the 1st, 4713 BC. We've got, today's 2018, 8th of August, etc. So we're familiar with normal calendar dates, okay? Well, astronomers, in order for accuracy and simplicity, what somebody did, right, they said, okay, we've got lots of different calendar systems globally. We've got Gregorian reforms that were in 1582. We've got the Julian calendar system that we use here. So I thought, okay, let's set up a special system. And some boffins decided the 1st of January, 4713 BC at 12 hours, universal coordinate time, universal time here. They were going to set that as 0 day, JD, Julian day, 0. They were just going to set that, and they said, right, we're going to have a pure count of days going forwards from that 0 day. And so every calendar date going forwards into the future is going to have an associated Julian day number based upon 0 right there. And if you go back beyond that date, you're going to minus figures. So we can very accurately know which dates we're talking about. So for example, if we were to go forwards 1,000 days from day 0 here, this would give us the 27th of September, 4711 BC. Because it's a whole number of Julian days, it's always at 12 noon, okay? If we were to go forward to this one here, 2,369,916 days, then we go forward to the 4th of July, 1776. Very good for Americans there, that what happened on that date. And again, it's 12 noon. So you can see when we're in our present time, because we're going forward about 6,500 years or so, the numbers get very, very big. But we do have, for every calendar date, a corresponding Julian day number. 1st of January 2000 is this one here, 2451545 Julian day. And if we were to go back in time, we get to minus figures. So 21st of September 5000 BC, 12, is minus 104,563. Now, as there are 86,400 seconds in a day, that's like 5 numbers. Whenever you deviate from, say, 12 noon on a given day, in this case here, we're on 6th of August 2018, 20 hours, 10 minutes, 31 seconds. You can see how you've got the whole number of days here, and it's point and then 34064. That point 34064 is the time differing from 12 noon universal time. So you get these very precise dates. So if you've got astronomy software, you kind of know this. When I give you these calendar dates, I'm going to always give you a Julian day number, and you can plug that directly in. So there's no mistake about where what times I'm talking about. And also when I'm talking about calendars, what I'm going to be doing is subtractions between or additions between different Julian day numbers for the calculations. Okay, so again, you can see exactly the math. So now I've just done that, which was very necessary. Let's get on with the analysis. Now we're going to look, first of all, at this core pattern here. And we're going to look at a full interval. I'm going to give you data at least for a full interval. Now remember I said that the full cycle is 4,497 sidereal years. Now this is the interval in question that I'm going to be looking at. The last time the conjunction pattern occurred was in 1345 AD here. And I'm going to look then at the time period 4,497 years from 3153 BC here to 1345 AD here. Now, if you're going to then specify the time of the alignment for each of these years, you need a standard. You need to say what's the standard I'm going with for the alignment. And in this case, the core pattern, and this is the basis, this is the very basis itself of the Mayan and Aztec long count and calendar systems. What they did when they devised their calendar units, they basically took their pattern here and refined it in terms of an optimum Mars, Venus, Sun alignment. They optimized it. So, I mean, they could have picked Mars, Venus, Mercury and let the Sun be offset, or the Sun, Earth, Pleiades, but that's really not the best one at all. So what they did was they looked at Mars, Venus, Sun optimum. So I'm going to show you what I mean by that and just giving you some screenshots. Starting with this one here, 3153 BC, we're going to look at what's going on in the solar system on the precise day that this pattern occurs, optimized to Mars, Venus, and the Sun, 3153 BC. So from above in Starry Night, we have this. Now this is me pressing the print screen button, but I need to just qualify this here. Because I'm in full screen mode, I've had to manually write out and put in the top left here, the calendar day that I'm looking at. So it's the 2nd of October, 3153 BC. Universal coordinate time, 13 hours, 59 minutes, 0. And that's the Julian day number, right there. Now, in Starry Night, the labels tend to be quite small for the planets. And some of the planets are almost like dots, so you can't even see them. So what I've done is, I had to basically input my own bigger labels so that you'll be able to see them on screen. So all the labels for the planets is me manually putting bigger labels in. And I've also put bigger blobs basically over where the planets are in Starry Night. So I'm not manipulating them. I'm not adjusting where the planets are. I'm just overlaying bigger blobs on top of the point positions of the planets. And I may at times put lines in, additional lines to show you the alignment. So this here is what you're looking at from above the Sun, just zoomed in a bit. You've got Mars, Venus, the Sun, and Mercury. And that alignment goes towards the galactic center region. Simultaneously, you've got the Sun and the Earth, and this goes towards the Pleiades star group, okay? So let's have a look from the perspective of the Sun. We're going to look in this general direction and see what I mean about Mars, Venus optimized, and the Earth and the Pleiades. So the next slide we get is this. Location at the center of the Sun. You can see the Earth here, and there's the Pleiades. It's about 3.5 degrees in this particular instance. And then you've got Mars and Venus. And as we're at the center of the Sun, they're practically on top of one another, optimized, okay? So that's that. Now, you can't see Mercury because that's behind us. So now we're going to switch to the center of Mars and look down the line and see that galactic conjunction. And this is what we see. The Sun's there, Venus and Mercury. And I said it optimized because we're at the center of Mars. What I mean by that is, if we zoom in, that line there across the bottom is the orbital line of Venus turned on in Starry Night. The alignment is optimized such that we have the minimum angular separation between the center of the Sun and the center of Venus when the alignment is occurring. So the angle between this dashed line and this one is going to be like 90 degrees. Okay, so that's what I mean when I talk about optimize for Mars, Venus, and the Sun. And that's where we get this very precise time from. Mercury is about 1 degree, 15 minutes of arc from, as an angular sweep from there to this line here. So it's very, very close. But you can see how Mercury is more offset because I've deliberately refined it for Mars, Venus, and the Sun. So let me just show you a summary then. All you're looking at here are the raw data for the 5 conjunctions I said I'm looking at. The top line is what you've just seen visually. 2nd of October, 3153 BC, 13 hours, 59 minutes. And that was that angle between the Sun and Venus, 0 degrees 54. These are all the precise times for the other instances of this configuration occurring. Precise calendar days and Julian day numbers. I've also noted the angles. But I want to now draw your attention to these figures here on the right. These are the key figures, the intervals between conjunctions. Now, you can see here, these are in days of 24 hours. The first one is 432,096.12778. And you can see the others as well. These are in sidereal years. So you're just taking that figure and dividing it by 365.25636 or whatever. So before, I showed you that these were 1183, 1343, 1183, and 788. You can see how they're all just slightly different because now we're dealing in accurate figures. Okay, so these figures here form the basis of the long count and the calendar round system, these intervals, and this is why they chose the units that they did. So I'm going to carry forward these figures just here and show you how they were refined. In blue here, these are the figures just carried forwards. So you've got the precise Julian day numbers of the alignments optimized for Mars and Venus for these years. They're the intervals. But what they did is they either rounded to the nearest day upwards or downwards, all right? Depending on how they wanted to do it. Well, you see how this is 432,096, and then we've got this 0.12 or whatever. They rounded it down. So it's 432,096. This one here ends in 530. It's 0.25. They rounded it down to the nearest day. Ends in 530. This one, repeat of the first one, ends in 96. This one here, it's 287,840 and it's 0.758. They rounded this down, so it was ending in 840. These values here then are the whole number of days that were the basis as calendar intervals for the long count. And if you notice in blue here, the Julian day number is 570065 and it's 0.08. What I've done is I've rounded that one down to get rid of the 0.8. So this is the whole number Julian day. So these dates here, 2nd of October, 3153 BC, all these dates are all at 12 noon universal coordinate time, because these are all whole numbers and there's no decimal point and other numbers after them. And so if we've refined it down here, we've got the Julian day number right there for the alignment, the calendar interval in whole number days, the next Julian day, like so, all very precisely aligned here. Now, you may know where I'm going next with this. For all you people who know your long count, you're thinking, hey, one of the values of a long count is 144,000. 3 times 144,000 is 432,000. And if you're looking at this and you're saying, that's only 96 days off, I hope those bells are ringing in your head. Now you understand where we're going with this one. Now let me just briefly summarize then the calendar cycles of the Maya and the Aztecs. Just 3 cycles I want to talk about here. And I'm going to give everybody a nice little bit of a history lesson on the puzzle of the long count. So in green then, this part here is a slide talking about the long count. And so what happened was our clever scholars over the last century or 2 centuries or whatever, they went on down to the Americas, to places in Mexico and Guatemala, and they found all these ruined stone carvings or whatever, you know, like Jackson Pollock paintings, almost indecipherable, almost. But they found that they all had these weird engravings of dots and dashes. And here's a nice, lovely diagrammatic representation of a really pure listing of these dots and dashes and how they represent numbers going from 0 to 19, okay? And they thought, this is interesting. And so they basically deduced that the stones were comprised of a calendar system based upon 5 cycles. One cycle is the back ton. One back ton is 144,000 days. The next cycle is a caton, 7,200 days. Next cycle is a ton, 360 days. Next one's a uinal, 20 days. And then we have a 1-day cycle called a kin. And these here, I've just put them all in nice little ordering here, as you can see, with 5 numbers, or you know, like a 0-digit readout. So what you'd do if you were starting this calendar is, in the kin column here, you'd count up until you had 19 here. And then when it comes to day 20, you 0 it, and then you put a 1, you carry it over to the uinal column, because a uinal is 20 days, okay? Then you go 19 up here to carry 1 over, and that becomes a 2, and you build up until you have 17 in the uinal column, 19 here. You count 1 extra day, you're thinking, oh, this becomes 18. No, it doesn't, it's 0'd. And you put a 1 in the ton column, because you've now counted 360 days, 20 times 18. And a ton, as you can see, is 360 days. And you basically do the same thing until you build up 7,200 days. So all those are 0'd, and you have a 1 in the caton. When the caton is at 19 and just about to go to 20, you 0 that, so you have a full 0 readout, and you've now got a 1 in the back ton column, and you've counted 144,000 days. And that's basically the mechanism. So they see all these stone carvings, and I'm going to show you an image of one.
Okay, now wait. Okay, thank you so much. And this is very good, and I know you have more to go through, but we're going a bit over in time here. There's not going to be much time left. You know, we're trying to stay in the 2-hour framework. So I'm going to ask you, are you able to go through the rest of the presentation within the next, let's see, well, it's about 20 to 30 minutes max.
Is that all you've got the time left, 20, 30 minutes?
Well, that's, you know, that's a general, you know, sort of a block of a show, a 2-hour show. That's a maximum for people's, basically their sort of attention span. And even that is pushing it. So at this point, yes, you know, that's kind of how long my shows are. And that's the most reason. Now I can allow you to just go on. I won't participate and I won't give any questions. I'll just let this be your presentation. But I just wanted to interject this at this time, because there's another way you can go about this, and that is to sort of, because you're going into a great deal of detail and you're kind of explaining every slide and all of that, when in reality you could kind of jump to the sort of meat of your presentation, and really you've really laid the groundwork at this point, I think. So for people that are interested in a lot of detail, they might want to hear more of the detail that's going to lead to wherever you're going, which is, if I understand it, you know, at least a slide or two back, you actually kind of did have on the screen, I think it was 25, 28 or whatever it was, a year in which apparently it's going to go through the full cycle again. And there would have to be slots in between those that would be the 4 quarters of each of this play out of what you're trying to get at, the conjunction sort of pattern. But what I'm saying here is you have a choice. You can either continue this on your own, you know, website where you have a YouTube channel and go into all the detail from here on and include what we've already filmed here, and I can get that over to you. And we can keep this on my side as well. And then, or you can, you know, kind of go on past the 3-hour mark, but we won't have time for any kind of discussion. And you also, you know, so you have to kind of decide how you want to play it at this point, because it's more time than I realized that you were going to need. So what would you like to do? Do you want to summarize and then put the rest of the detail on your own YouTube where we can refer them over there? Or do you want to continue nonstop without any discussion, and I'll just let you run out until you're done?
If we go continuously non-stop, then without any discussion, are you going to record the whole thing?
Yes.
And can you put it on your website?
It's already on my website. It goes automatically.
Well, I prefer to do that. I mean, I know what you're saying, Kerry. The only way I could really rapidly go through this is to pluck dates straight out of thin air without explaining where I came up with them from. And it is a complex system. It's a brilliant, comprehensive system. And I said it'd be about 2 to 3 hours, maybe, you know. I'd be very happy for you to just record the whole thing and just put it on your YouTube channel, even if it's 3 hours long. if you want to go straight to the end.
Okay,
if that's
so
okay.
I'll let you just roll on through,
Yeah.
you know, and you've gotten your choice, and we'll just go
Yeah.
with that, okay?
Yeah.
And
Okay.
just for everyone listening, let me just say briefly that you know, we do welcome this kind of you might call it scholarship, investigation, whatever. And this is Keith Hunter doing something that he's clearly spent a great deal of time and work on. So I'm going to sort of move myself out of the picture at this point, and then we will close down the broadcast. I can come in at the very end and you say a few words possibly, but no guarantees there. It will go on to my main channel also, clearly labeled that it is your presentation, Keith. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
All right.
So we're basically not going to be recording anymore, but we're just going to be recording it privately. Is that basically
no, it's live. It is live right now, so it continues to go live.
Okay. Well, let me just continue on then. It might be another hour and a half or so, but you'll appreciate this, people. So I won't be able to check my work. So I've just described the lung count, okay? So they found all these stone carvings, and they all had various like dates on, composed of 5 values, indicative of various dates. Now, what they also had then, right on the same stone pillars, they had dates which were of this calendar round system. Now, I'll just basically say it's calendar round is a system composed of 2 cycles, 260 days and 365 days. And if you start both together at the same time, they resynchronize after 18,980 days. After that time period, you'll have counted precisely 52 these 365 days cycles and 73 260 days. You don't need to know anything more than that. The cycle is just a recurring cycle of 18,980 days. Then we have this one here, and you can see it's all on its own, 819 days. Again, the scholars went over to the actual site, and they found some stone carvings, and they thought, look, we were evidence here that they were really interested in the cycle of 819 days, and they didn't know why. They had no idea why, but they just realized that they were counting this at a certain period. So that was a real mystery cycle here, and I'm going to reveal to you exactly what that cycle is all about. So let me tell you all about the mystery of the lung count. So this is one of these stone carvings you can see right here. And these are all these like dots and dashes, and it's all very elaborate. And this one here seems to have a date of 13 back tons, 130000, and where it says 4 Ao 8 Kumku, these actually are the names of the months associated with the calendar round. But I'm not interested in that detail. But these are the kinds of stones. So these are some archaeological sites here, and they're in Mexico, Guatemala. And the stele just means stone carving, one of these basically. So they went along and they found a scattering of dates, and they saw the readouts like so, and they thought, okay, this is very interesting. And this is just a small sample. But what they found, based upon what I've told you about the back tons and the catons or whatever, they basically found a range of dates which seem to cover about 1,000-year period. But all they've got are look, these ruins, these stones here with these dates on. And our clever scholars were thinking to themselves, you know, what do these correspond to in terms of a Western calendar? You know, like we use days, months, and years, AD or BC, okay? So they're thinking, if we could only figure out how these dates map to our own system, we'd be able to date the entire civilization. So this was the big puzzle, okay? And so what it was is they didn't carve one of these big elaborate steles every single day, okay? But what they did is they carved them when there were special things going on, like an eclipse or some planetary conjunction or something like that, something notable. And so you get a scholar, he'd look at one date, you get the numerical value and then say, oh, when this was carved, there was an eclipse. And then they'd like get another one. Oh, there was an eclipse and this other one was carved. So then they needed to like map them and figure out a mapping that was valid for both of them. And so they were basically working their way through several key dates where they thought they could triangulate it. And once they found out what they thought the correct mapping was, It fixed the whole 1,000-year range. And then they said to themselves, we can take the mechanism of the long count as I've described it, and in an unbroken sequence, wind it all the way back, and we will have a theoretical 0 readout day for the long count. And so every man and his dog basically was out trying to figure the mystery of when did the long count start. And here's a nice little list of the main contenders. And it's not exhaustive, you know, there's more people than this. So one guy called Bowditch, right, he thought that a 0 readout from the mapping that he did would be the 14th of January, 3633 BC. That's the Julian day number. At the other extreme, we've got Valent. He thought the 0 readout would be 3rd of July, 2854 BC. So you can see there's about 800 years differences. So everybody's got their own views upon when these stones were carved and when the mapping was. Now, do we have a winner? And the answer is yes. GMT is the winner. GMT stands for Goodman, Martinez, and Thompson. If you notice here, there's a Goodman, there's a Martinez here, there's a Thompson here. And these guys are all thinking it's somewhere very early on in September, 3114 BC. They're all really confident. So between them, they just did a subtle modification. They thought, we've nailed the precise day. It's the 6th of September, 3140 BC, Julian day number 584283. Now, the mapping for the sample that they gave, if they were to take all the stone carvings under their mapping, they would correspond then to calendar days under the Julian system, exactly as under this particular configuration they've worked out. Their mapping is flawless, but here's one of the tragedies of science. It's not their technical solution that's the fault. It's all the assumptions that go with it. And here they are. So they think then that when they've got that sample, which apparently under their mapping, the 1,000-year range is about, it's 0 to about 1,000 years AD. It's actually the first millennium under, you know, our system. I think the earliest one, the earliest recorded stone carving found is 37 BC. And the latest one, I think, is about 1,000 AD. So it's about 1,000 years that we've got these scattered stones, you know, various dates. So they basically got the mapping nailed to that particular time period. But they are assuming that the calendar has never been modified since it was started. This is assumption number one. And therefore, they assume that they can take the calendar system and go back through the mechanism of the 5 cycles and come out with what would be a 0 readout day, which is this date here, 6th of September. That's the second assumption. Both those go hand in hand. The next assumption is this one. They think that a complete cycle is 13 backtons. Okay? Now, the reason why they think that is because they think that the Mayan people thought that. Well, here's the problem. They did. The Mayan people, though, the first millennium AD, unfortunately, had failed to maintain their calendars. And these scholars don't realize it, that all the actual values as carved in stone are systematically in error. It's a consistent sample, but they're all wrong, the dates. And it's the Mayans that got it wrong, not our scholars. They got the perfect technical solution to the problem, but they didn't realize the Mayans had screwed up. And just to give you an example of what I mean by screwed up, we currently have a calendar system every year of 365 days. We count 3 years of 365 days and then a 4th year of 366 days. Okay? And then we do the same again. We have a leap year every 4 years. Just imagine if we've just counted a year of 365 days and we've kind of gone a bit thick or something, and we decided, let's just keep on counting years of 365 days and forget that leap year. Well, what would happen is the calendar would go out of whack quite rapidly with the seasons and be completely useless. And that exactly, in a nutshell, is what the Mayans did. The Mayans, as I'll demonstrate as we go on, in 627 BC, they should have reset their calendar to 0, reset the long count to 0, and then started again from a 0 readout. So all the values should be a lot lower than what they are. Okay, the Mayans failed to do that. You see, the long count is designed to target this special conjunction I've told you about. And so every time you get to an instance of it, you either reset to 0 or you have a very significant pause period, okay, which is an adjustment. So what we got is they were using their calendar correctly for a time, and then they failed to make critical adjustments, and so it fell into disrepair. This is why the sample's wrong, and this is not the correct 0 date. Which brings us to me, Keith Hunter's theory. That's me. What is the correct 0 date? It's not 3114 BC. It's 3153 BC. It's the day of the alignment, because that's what the calendar is all about. That's the 0 readout date. Now, I don't think that it was the ultimate 0 readout, because I think they were using it before, even going back thousands of years. But this date here, of the 2nd of October 3153 BC, is definitely a date when they would have reset to 0. So just to summarize, I believe the calendar was in use prior to 3153 BC. The last instance of the conjunction pattern before that was in 3941 BC. It's the arid condition thing that I talked about. And the interval there is that 788-year difference. That's the shortest interval of the 4 that I gave. So 788 years, the calendar value is 160 days less than 2 back tons, right? 160 days less than 288,000 days. So what they'd have done basically, when the alignment was present at 3941 BC, they will have reset the calendar to 0 then and preloaded it with 160 days. And then the very next day, they'll just start counting immediately 1 day at a time. Because they preloaded it with 160 days, the readout would achieve a nice harmonious 2 back tons, as you see here, 20000, right on the 2nd of October 3153 BC, this date here, when the alignment is achieved again. It's all about synchronizing. It's all about achieving a harmonious calendar cycle completing when the alignment is achieved. So when they get then to this alignment here, the readout's 2 back tons, and then they reset to 0. That's what they did. Now they're now gonna look at a different interval, which is going to be very close, and this is assumption number 2, 3 back tons, right? It's going to be the next interval. This is going to occur in 1970 BC. So just let me show you what they did. There's the alignment of 3153 BC. The next subinterval is 1183 sidereal years, or precisely 432,096 days. So what do? Well, they maintain the calendar at a 0 readout for 96 days. They just have a special independent separate 96-day count to take them to the 6th of January 3152 BC. So the calendar readout just before the count commences, it's a 0 readout, and the very next day on the 7th of January, they will put a 1 in that kin column right there, and they begin the count. This would ensure then that the readout of the calendar route, of calendar system, would be 8th October 1970 BC, 3 back tons, harmonized perfectly. That's the aim of the game, ladies and gentlemen. Harmonization. And that's what they did. Now, I'm so certain that that's what they did because the error confirms it. So let me just show you the difference between me and the GMT guys again. Goodman, Martinez, and Thompson assume no adjustments and blindly go all the way back to the 6th of September 3114 BC. This is the 0 readout before the count commences. For me, the 0 readout is the 6th of January 3152 BC, this Julian day number. And the difference between us is 14,122 days. Now, here's the thing. If I'm right, and I kind of know I am because we had a pause of precisely 14,122 days. Shortly after they achieved that 3 back ton on the long count, they kept it going just for several more years, and then they froze the readout and shut the calendar down. They did not reset to 0. They just froze the readout and stopped counting for approximately 40 years. the actual figure that they stopped counting for was this one, 14,122 days. I know exactly when they shut the calendar down. I know exactly the date they restarted it, how it's tied into their ceremonies and everything. And when they did restart it, and they started it going, the mapping was now perfectly in line with that, which extended all the way into the first millennium AD that Goodman, Martinez, and Thompson analyzed. The thing is, though, after 1970 BC, after that alignment, the next one to occur is the 627 BC alignment. And that is when they should have reset to 0. They never did. For some reason, they lost all critical knowledge of how to use their calendar cycles by 627 BC. And as a result, they just blindly kept the count going. And all the values are all systematically wrong. But because they are systematically wrong, it didn't stop Goodman, Martinez, and Thompson from cracking the puzzle. Now, there's just one final thing I want to tell you about, and that is how the calendar round was actually used over this same period. I've just shown you how the long count was used. They had a 96-day delay and counted through to 3 back tons. We have the calendar round, and we know that the cycle is 18,980 days. This is just this summary here at the left. Just look at that one day there, 18,980 days. If we look here then, the total cycle length is 432,096 days. If we divide it by calendar round, basically, we can fit 22 full cycles into this interval. We can't fit any more because there's not enough days. This is less, right? 14,536 days is less than this, so we can't fit any more in. So what they wanted to do is they just wanted to count the maximum number of these cycles that they could, and they wanted to start counting at a very specific time. So here's how they did it. Here's the initial alignment, 2nd of October, 3153 BC. Long counts maintained at 0 for 96 days to here. Then they begin counting the long count. They'll go through the mechanism and achieve the 3 back ton readout right on the next instance of the alignment on October the 8th, 1970. As they are going through it, though, you know one of those intervals is a caton, 7,200 days. 2 catons is 14,400 days. Well, when their calendar readout reads 2 catons here, and they're on the 10th of June, 3113 BC, the next day after that, they start counting their calendar rounds. They count 22 in all, and then they shut it down for a significant pause. They shut it down on the 29th of August, 1970, and there are 40 days left to achieve this 3 back ton readout. You can see in green at the bottom. On the left here, the long count will read 2/19/1916 when the calendar round system has completed 22 and shut down. Here on the right, 40 days later, it's 3 back tons. Now, I needed to give you this 40 days. I needed to mention it because it's so crucial for what goes on later on regarding the Exodus event. So what I've done so far then is the following. I have given you an explanation of how the calendar system was used just for this one interval here, 432,096 days between these 2 instances of the alignment. I am not going to deal with the other here. I could reconstruct the whole thing, but I don't want to. I wanted to give you what I've given you is the minimum amount of information necessary in order for me to tell you all about these other disasters. So let's get on with the first one then. The Great Flood. This is Noah's flood, okay? So when did it occur? For those of you doubting if it did occur, well, we can dismiss all that. We know it occurred. But let's just give you, first of all, as it is Noah's flood, let's give you the Bible timeline. Here we go. Bishop Ussher's infamous year of creation, 4004 BC. Well, I'm no young earth creationist, and what happened in 4004 BC was one of these variant alignments, a very special alignment, okay? Now, I'm not going to get into that, but suffice it to say, that figure is a significant year when something really special did happen. Now, Obviously, the world's existed for billions of years before there. And Bishop Ussher is just doing a pure Bible chronology. So he just uses this as the date Adam's created, okay? This is the date. And he looks at all the dates of all the patriarchs, and his big analysis says that 1656 years after creation, in inverted commas, we have the big flood. So according to him, according to the Bible timeline, it's 2348 BC. This is when the disaster happened. Well, do we have any science backing this up? Absolutely we do. From all over the world, in fact, we know a massive disaster occurred at this time. This is from Mesopotamia, which is modern-day Iraq. This is a few fragments from some studies people have done, just summarizing it. So they talk about a third millennium BC climate change, an old world collapse. And they're looking at sediment records, and they basically find a spike in certain materials like quartz content, etc. And they've calibrated it to a certain year, and they basically found out as well that it says, as Butzer notes the Lemke and Sturm oxygen isotope record from the Van Valves, it's technical, but it indicates a pronounced dry spell circa 2350 to 2075. A sudden dry spell just suddenly happened 2350, and it lasted up until 2075. It's all very dry and technical. Here's another one. They basically find the same thing, same date. They're looking at archaeological deposits, and they're looking. This is in Syria. It's a layer of uncommon petrographic assemblage. It's absolute gobbledygook from a scientific standpoint, I have to say. So they're going to say it consists of fine sand-sized, well-assorted spheroids of blah, 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 whatever. But the bottom line is, as I've highlighted in red here, they've got something sudden happening, and they think it's a result or caused by an air blast. This is why I've highlighted it in red. Then, being cautious academics, in the last sentence, they say, they can no longer be considered as a typical fallout derived from the dispersion of material from a terrestrial volcanic explosion. Origin of this mysterious phenomenon still remains unsolved. In other words, they know that this air blast thing that caused all this disruption and all these sudden layers, okay, it came from space. It didn't come from a terrestrial volcano blowing up material which fell back down to Earth. But they don't want to say it came from space because they're cautious academics. So let's look at the next one. This is tree ring data. This is from Ireland. We read, according to this book here, according to the dendrochronological research done in Ireland on Irish bog oaks, between the period of 2354 and 2345 BC, the oaks stopped growing completely and showed bark changes which indicate that they were submerged in water, all submerged in water. And again, same kind of date. And then we've got China. We've actually got the records here. Ancient Chinese records recorded a great flood which occurred at the same time. And they're giving the names of the emperors and talking about huge floods that overtopped the mountains. And again, they give a kind of date of 2346 BC, and they say it lasts about 9 years. And again, to huge local floods. Well, if we've got events happening in China, Syria in the Middle East, Ireland, we've got something massive and global here with a space connection. So this flood event is real. It wasn't like all the water went higher than all the land like in that Kevin Costner movie Waterworld. It's not that kind of thing. But we have massive flooding, water sweeping across different places, submerging areas for quite some time, and we have this climate change thing which suddenly occurs and lasts for a few centuries. So it turns out that the Bible chronology is correct. Let me just show you again. 2348 is the year when it all happened. And if you go to 2348 in Starry Night, look at plan view of the solar system, and then you basically let the planets do their thing, you end up finding a very incredible conjunction pattern suddenly emerge out of nowhere. And this is it. On the 27th of September, 2348 BC, there's the Julian day number. We have Jupiter, Venus, Mercury, and the Earth all lined up. The sun's not a part of it. This is the planets lining up here, and I'll show you from the perspective of the center of Jupiter, looking down the line. This is what we see. Quite remarkable. This is a screenshot again. Halley's Comet, that is the actual image that they have on Halley's Comet, which is 3 days from perihelion. So we've got from the center of Jupiter, it's aligned to the Earth, Venus, and Mercury here. And this, the Pleiades star group, right there as well, only about, so I think it's 2.5 degrees off. You'll tend to find that there are certain directions in the sky when these conjunctions occur. And the Pleiades is one of these directions when a lot of these global disaster conjunctions occur, okay, when we have something aligned to the Pleiades. So this conjunction pattern is very close, just a couple of degrees from the Pleiades. And it's a very accurate one involving the Earth, Venus, Mercury, and Jupiter. Now, I refined this to the most optimum Julian day number to get the 27th of September. And when I did, what did I do next? I looked to see if there was a harmonization to the calendar cycles of the ancients, and I found there was. And it was all to do with the mysterious 819-day cycle. So, let's have a look. How did they target Noah's flood? The Mayans knew about this cycle. Noah knew about this cycle, I would say, as well. And both of them knew that the flood was going to occur literally to the day about 800 years in advance. And I said at the beginning that these conjunction patterns, the core pattern of this configuration here, the galactic center, Mercury, Sun, Venus, Mars, and Sun, Earth, Pleiades alignment, this date here is the anchor point on which to target the flood conjunction. And they use the 819-day cycle to do it. And this is how. How many cycles did they count? They took the number 360, subtracted 1 to get 359, and they counted precisely 359 cycles of 819 days. And this is 294,021 days, right here. That's the total amount of days they counted. And they counted them direct following this date here. No special adjustment. You know, like with the long count, we had like a 96-day count. None of that. They started this count immediately after because it achieves perfect harmonization. If you are at this date here, 2nd of October, 3153 BC, and you start counting cycles of 819 days, then when you've counted 359, then bang, you flawlessly target the alignment right on the day in question, 27th of September, 2348. This is the kind of information that I'm going to be presenting throughout this presentation. I'm going to show you how they actually targeted these events, what the conjunctions were, and how they did it with extreme precision. So this is how they knew that the flood was going to occur, okay, about 800 years in advance. Now let's look to another very famous disaster, the Exodus. Now, we've all seen the stories. You might have seen the 10 Commandments movie with Charlton Heston and Yul Brynner in. So what have we got going off? We've got a massive great disaster. We've got hailstones, massive stones crashing down from the sky. We've got the Nile going blood red. We've got famines, disease, dust covering the land. The whole works, okay? The whole works. Massive disaster. A lot of people out there then have tried from an archaeological perspective to figure out when the flood occurred. Velikovsky thought it was 1495 BC. That's the date he cites in his book. A lot of archaeologists have gone for 1446, and that is, again, mid-15th century BC. Then we've got some dates that say mid-13th century BC, 1250-ish. They are a complete nonsense. The correct answer is mid-15th century, but we can nail it to the day. And this is a brilliant way. And this just goes to show you how clever these guys were. So let's look at the puzzle here. Let me show you the core pattern. This is the thing I showed you before about all these disasters going back. And I have highlighted in red here, 3941 BC. This is one of the dates when this special conjunction occurred on. Okay, so 3941 BC, hold that in your mind, ladies and gentlemen. Just hold it there, and let's cite Velikovsky. This is from Worlds in Collision, a nice passage. And Velikovsky is looking at various different ancient people that basically had ideas on cycles of destruction. So one guy, Heraclitus, he taught that the world is destroyed in conflagration after every period of 10,800 years. And then we had another guy, Aristarchus of Samos, in the 3rd century before the present era, taught that in a period of 2,484 years, the earth undergoes 2 destructions of combustion and deluge. Well, I put that one in bold. 2484. It almost looks like a random figure somebody's made up, but that Aristarchus is a genius. That figure is spot on. So hold that there. Let's go to Egypt itself. Spectacular and terrifying comets. This is a nice passage from an article, Ancient Origins website by Graham Phillips. This is a quote. He's talking about this comet that was seen in Egypt. It was recorded by the Egyptians in the 22nd year of the reign of the pharaoh Tutmosis III, who described it as a brilliant disk, much larger than the full moon, adding that it was a marvel never before seen since the foundation of this land. Chinese astronomers who meticulously recorded celestial occurrences for astrological purposes also noted the breathtaking event. And it says here that the comet is one of the largest ever observed. Not only did it fill a large part of the sky, it had an astonishing 10 tails, the biggest comet observed since the birth of modern astronomy. This is in Egypt, 22nd year of the reign of Pharaoh Tutmosis III. So when did this guy reign? Well, Wikipedia to the rescue. Here we go. We have it. The Orthodox scholars have got it nailed. He reigned from 1479 to 1425. And they actually say during the first 22 years of his reign, he was co-regent with his stepmother and aunt. Now, that's interesting. They mentioned 22 years, but they don't talk about a comet here. A bit too conservative. So if we add all this together, here's what we've got. That core alignment pattern, 3941 BC, subtract the Aristarchus interval, and we get 1457 BC. Tutmosis rule begins, 1479, comet sighted 22 years later, 1457 BC. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. The year of the Exodus is 1457 BC. So, what did I do? Plugged in Starry Night, looked down at the solar system, put in the 1st of January, 1457 BC, press the play button and watch the planets do their dance. And I'm watching and I'm watching and I'm watching, and then stop dead, hit the pause button as an incredible conjunction pattern suddenly emerges. And then I refine this pattern to make sure I've got it accurate to the nearest day. What am I looking at? This. 28th of March, 1457 BC. Above the sun, Mars, Earth, Mercury, Venus. Beautifully lined up. Sun's not involved. I can also tell you that the Earth, the moon itself in orbit of the Earth, is also part of this conjunction. You can't see it because it's not present. I'd have to really zoom in on the Earth. But there is the Exodus alignment. And if there's any doubts, well, let's see if we can remove them. If we position ourselves at the center of Mars and look all the way down the line here, there's something else of interest we might want to note. Our good buddy, the Pleiades, flawlessly lined up with all the planets, just like that flood event, eh? When we've got the planets lined up, and just there close by is the Pleiades, where all the planets lined up as an optimum, right there. 28th of March, 1457 BC. An exquisite targeting. So did anybody know that the Exodus was going to occur? Well, the answer is absolutely. They were aware of it 500 years in advance, to the day. And now we go to the Mayan people. I need to back up that very powerful statement there. So let's have a look. This is why I wanted to tell you all about the calendar round. So let me summarize, because it's all to do with this 40-day shortfall. There's the core alignment there. They wait 96 days, special count, then they begin counting the long count. This achieves the 3 backton readout And we have the next instance of the alignment, 8th of October, 1970 BC. Now, when they start counting, long count though, after 14,400 days, they start counting their calendar round units. They count 22 and then shut down the calendar 29th of August, 1970. 40 days remain to get to the alignment. So the midpoint of the 40 days is where I need to draw your attention to. The 18th of September, 1970 BC. This is in between the 29th of August and the 8th of October. And you can see with the Julian day numbers, this one ends 2-1, this one ends 6-1, and in the midpoint, 4-1. When they had completed the first 20 days of this 40-day shortfall, they then set in motion an additional calendar system, which was going to run parallel to the long count and calendar round as they go forwards after the pause period. So they're going to set up another calendar system. This is what you've got to understand about these systems. They end up setting up and using multiple calendar systems running in parallel to one another, targeting varying conjunctions. So what were the primary units then of this special calendar system that they used? What's the core unit of the system? And the answer is right on screen. This here. 14,400 days. The very pause period that they used to set up their calendar system to start counting it is also recognized as a distinct mathematical cycle. And they counted units of 14,400 days to also harmonize with alignment patterns. So here's what they did. Here's the midpoint to the 40 days, 20 days before the 3 back-turn readout. They counted from that point precisely 13 cycles of 14,400 days, which is 187,200 days. When they'd done that, what did they drop on with absolute perfection? Exodus Day, the very day of the alignment, flawlessly targeted, exceptional harmony, right there. They knew about the Exodus date. Obviously, they don't know the term Exodus because we're talking about the Mayans, the Aztecs, over in the Americas. They don't know the Exodus. That's a biblical term. But they knew about the alignment and the disaster that would happen. You see, if we look back at the conjunction pattern here, what is this comet that's sighted? The correct answer is a flare-up, probably of Venus and Mercury. It's these two planets here flaring up that are the comet or comets. Now, it may well be that Mercury is the one that flared up first because the planets go anti-clockwise. So the Earth's going to go around here, and Mercury's going to develop a cometary tail stretching away here, and it's going to come over here. It could well be that Mercury was the great comet, but it might also be Venus. But as again, both of them could have ignited as comets. But it's the known planets that are the comets. That's the important thing. These people sighting comets, it's not just a random comet. It's the planets, okay? So let's move on to another great biblical disaster. The celestial upheaval under King Uzziah of Judah. Now, let's have a look from Velikovsky, because he mentions this. In the 8th century, in the days of Uzziah, king of Jerusalem, there occurred a devastating catastrophe called rash or commotion. Amos is one of the prophets, in the Bible, who lived at the time of Uzziah, began to predict a cosmic upheaval before the rash took place. The prophecy of Amos was made 2 years before the rash. So let's have a look. Book of Amos, Amos 1. Words of Amos, one of the shepherds of Tekoa, the vision he saw concerning Israel 2 years before the earthquake, when Uzziah was king of Judah and Jeroboam, son of whatever of Israel. He said that the Lord rose from Zion and thunders from Jerusalem. The pastures of the shepherds dry up and the top of Carmel withers. Now this is Amos 1. When you get into like Amos chapters 2, 3, and 4, it's basically a great big massive rant where the Lord is basically saying, I will send fire on, and he lists the house of Hazael, the walls of Gaza, walls of Tyre, Teman, walls of Rab, Moab. he basically was in a rant against all these people, and it says for all of them, I will send fire on. And he says to Israel in another big rant, I will crush you as a cart crushes when loaded with grain. But I'm interested in Amos 5. Amos 5, here is what he says. We get some more details about this disaster. He who made the Pleiades and Orion, who turns midnight into dawn and darkens day into night, who calls for the waters of the sea and pours them out over the face of the land. The Lord is his name. With a blinding flash he destroys the stronghold and brings the fortified city to ruin. Here we've got mention of the Pleiades, and also about some kind of darkness going off as well. Well, the first thing we need to look at is, did we have an earthquake mid-8th century? Well, absolutely we did. The clever scientists have got the physical evidence for it. Here's a citation. A magnitude 8 event. Earthquake debris at 6 sites, and there they all are, I'm not going to mispronounce them, is tightly confined stratigraphically to the middle of the 8th century BC, dating error of about 30 years. The evidence points to a single large regional earthquake that occurred about 750 BC. And this is on the Dead Sea transform fault zone. So it's right next to the Dead Sea where Israel is like today even. It said the earthquake in question was at least magnitude 7.8, more likely 8.2. It appears to be the largest yet documented on the Dead Sea transform fault zone during the last 4 millennia. The Dead Sea transform fault likely ruptured along more than 400 kilometers as the ground shook violently for over 90 seconds. The urban panic created by this earthquake would have been legendary. Well, that's the earthquake sorted. What else? This is from Velikovsky. If the commotion of the days of Uzziah was of global character and was brought about by an extraterrestrial agent, it must have caused some disturbance in the motion of the Earth on its axis and along its orbit. Such a disturbance would have made the old calendar obsolete and would have required the introduction of a new calendar. In 747 BC, a new calendar was introduced in the Middle East, and that year is known as the beginning of the era of Nabonassar. It is asserted that some astronomical event gave birth to this new calendar, but the nature of the event is not known. Now, basically, these scientists have got this earthquake study and all the evidence pointing towards mid-750 BC, and they've got an error rate of about 30 years or so. What Velikovsky's done is he's looked at a lot of ancient records and found that, a lot of these civilizations in the Middle East, they were actually operating what appears to be a 360-day calendar. And he's saying that they had a change at a certain day in the year 747 BC, they shut down this calendar. So he's basically coming up with a date, a precise date to look at when this calendar change occurred. And he's thinking, this must mark the beginning of a new age, and maybe the earthquake is dated to that. So if we go forwards, here's what he came up with. Uzziah reigned about 789 to 740 BC, the last few years of his reign beginning with the day of commotion. He spent in seclusion, having been pronounced a leper. Time was counted from the commotion in the days of Uzziah, and this upheaval, the upheaval in the days of Uzziah is what separated these two ages. And then he finds out the precise date, and this is crucial. If this conclusion is correct, the upheaval took place in 747 BC. The computation according to which the era started on the 26th day of February must be re-examined in the light of the fact that further cosmic disturbances occurred during the decades that followed 747 BC. It is worth noting, however, that the ancient inhabitants of Mexico celebrated their new year on the day which corresponds in the Julian calendar to the same date. The first day of the year was the 6 and 20 day of February. So we've got it nailed here. Velikovsky has given us the date. The 26th of February, 747 BC, is the first day of the new year. So the day we're interested in has got to be the day before, the 25th of February, which is the final day of the age. Now, I have to say, guys, I am absolutely plundering Velikovsky here. I am stood on the shoulders of a giant in this respect. You see, Velikovsky did his work, as you can see, in 1950. And he did all the research that found some brilliant critical dates when calendar changes were made, and he thinks they're associated with disaster. But what Velikovsky could not do in his own time was what I am doing right now, because personal computers did not exist. He couldn't plug in Starry Night and plug in these dates like I'm showing you and see whether there was any conjunction patterns going on. He was not able to go further with his work, so we've had to wait for somebody like me to come along. So if we go then to the 25th of February, the day before the age, first started, here is what we get when we look down on the solar system. What an amazing alignment. Earth, Venus, Mars, and Ceres, all nicely lined up. Now, for those of you wondering, Ceres is the dwarf planet in the asteroid belt. It's a small body about 600 miles in diameter, and it comprises 1/3 of the entire mass of the asteroid belt. Now, I have to say, guys, I use Starry Night, and periodically they do updates to change the astronomical solutions. And do you know what? I was finding Ceres tied into so many of these alignments throughout a very specific solution that was on Starry Night for about a year, I think. And then they degraded the solution to a different one. So I had to go to the Wayback Web machine and get the JPL ephemeris for the correct solution to Ceres. And this is it here. This is like the miracle solution for Ceres. If you input these values precisely in Starry Night, that's where you'll see Ceres the way it is. If you are not using this solution, then Ceres will not appear in these alignments. You've got to use this one. All I can say is, this is the best solution. And Starry Night appears to have switched to a degraded solution, which is incorrect. You've got to use this solution, otherwise you'll not see Ceres in any of these alignments. So I've just got to tell you that. There's a program feature in Starry Night called Add a Planet, and you've got to basically manually create a planet and plug that in. You can't use theirs because it won't work. They've just cheapened it for some reason. So you've got to use that one. This brings us to the next point here. This is what we look at then when we are at the center of the Earth and we look down the line. Not only do we see Ceres, Venus, and Mars lined up there, we've also got Uranus and Neptune closely next to the Pleiades. Remember Amos was talking about the Pleiades in his passage? And again, we've got twin conjunctions going off. And I'll also tell you that if you actually position yourself at the center of the sun, this Uranus-Neptune conjunction, they're practically on top of one another. It's almost flawless. So it's even more optimized there. So that's what you get. So 25th of February, this is the date here then. Was anybody using a calendar system to track time, to actually give us? The answer is yes. Let me show you here. They use this cycle here, the 14,400 one. Now, this is just summarizing how the Exodus event was targeted with it. From the midpoint, they counted precisely 13 times 14,400 and dropped on the Exodus alignment. When they've done that, the calendar reaches fulfillment, so they shut it down. They then have a special pause period before recommencing. And lo and behold, the pause period just happens to be 96 days. The exact same pause used previously for the long count. They use it here. So they maintain their readout, so to speak. They stop the count of the cycle of 14,400, count 96 days, and then start the calendar again. And this time they count 18 cycles of 14,400. And when they do that, bang, flawlessly targeted to the day. They target the day of the alignment. So they knew about this in advance. What you'll tend to find is this is lost knowledge. I'm telling you, I'm reconstructing here. The ancients seem to be fully aware, okay, of all these disasters and when they were up and coming, because they had the calendar systems to do it. It's just that they've lost this knowledge, okay? So that's how we got to the disaster here. But I'll just say one other little thing here. Velikovsky, he talks about people using a 360-day calendar. Well, obviously, 14,400 days is 40 times 360 days. It harmonizes. From the American perspective, from the Indians of America, I think they were using this distinct cycle of 14,400. But when these calendar systems came to an end, these 360-day calendar systems, they did it on this date here, 747. And that, I believe, is because they were counting not 18 times 14,400, but 720 cycles of 360 days. When they reached the disaster, they shut down the calendar. Okay? The Earth did not, as Velikovsky thought, have 360 days per year because people were using a 360-day calendar. That's incorrect. They were just using this as a time cycle in an unbroken count set up following the Exodus event just to target the alignment here. This 360-day calendar has nothing to do with tracking the real orbit of the Earth around the sun, okay? Nothing whatsoever. So that's what you've got right there. So let's move on. Are you still there, Kerry?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. Can you just bear with me about 3 minutes? I just need to a bit of a break here. Just one moment.
All right. So I guess we're having a break for a couple minutes here, and Keith will be right back. Okay, go ahead.
Yep, so that there then is King Uzziah's disaster there. And what I was saying was that Velikovsky, he thought that the calendars in use, that people were using a 360-day cycle because the Earth actually had 360 days to orbit the sun. But no, it was just a world age cycle calendar system that had nothing to do with the Earth's orbit around the sun at all, okay? So they just, when they got to this point, 25th of February, they shut down the 360-day calendar because it had reached fulfillment. Okay, and that's why they were focused mainly upon the 365 and a quarter day calendar system. And another reason. Now we've dealt with that one, let's deal with another great disaster from mythology. This is a classic, this one. The death of Phaethon. This is from a book by Ovid in Metamorphoses about the Greek gods. And it's all about the son of the sun. That is the sun in the sky, the big light, the center of our solar system. The sun god, right? He has a son called Phaethon. And I'll just briefly summarize it. But what happens is he grants a wish to his son. He says, my son, ask me for anything that you want. And if it's within my power, I'll grant it. And Phaethon, his son, says, I want to drive your chariot of light for a single day. In other words, he wants to be the sun and fly across the sky for a day, And unfortunately, the sun god thinks, oh no, what have I done? This is the one thing that he would deny him. And he didn't anticipate he'd ask for that. But because he swore this solemn oath to heaven, he can't back out of it. So he basically tries to talk his son out of it, but he won't listen. Phaethon wants to drive the chariot of light. So at the crack of dawn then, he gets the horses together, his 4 horses, gets the chariot all set up. Phaethon stands in it, he's got the reins ready, and his father says to him, okay, son, just don't go too high, don't go too low, try and stay on this nice steady path throughout, as you're going on your journey. And he then rubs some protective ointment on his face and transfers the rays of the sun onto his head. And the crack of dawn, off he goes. And it's an absolute disaster. First he goes too high and he's burning up all the constellations in heaven. Then he goes too low and he's burning up the earth, and the cracks are appearing in the earth and everything's shaking apart. And also, Ovid provides a very detailed description of the whole disaster. And there's a few key passages that I need to cite here, which are crucial to understanding this particular story. When Phaethon is traveling around the sky then on his fateful, disastrous day, he gets tormented by various beasts. And here's a citation from Ovid. To add to his fear, he, Phaethon, now perceived the monstrous beasts of huge size which lay scattered over the spangled face of heaven. There is a certain place where the scorpion stretches out his pincers in 2 hollow arcs, and with his tail and curving claws outspread on either side, sprawls over 2 signs of the zodiac. When the boy saw him, exuding his baneful poison and menacing him with his curved sting, he was so completely unnerved and numb with fear that he dropped the reins. They fell from his hands and lay loose on the horses' backs. At once the team galloped away out of their course. So the critical moment when he loses total control is when he sees the pincers of the scorpion. Now, at this point, everything's falling apart in the heavens. So the earth goddess goes to Zeus, the father of all the gods, and says, Zeus, if you don't do something right now, everything's going to be reduced to ruin. And so Zeus says, okay, I better get something done here. And so Zeus intervenes to take out Phaethon. And here's what Ovid says. He then mounted up to the highest point of heaven, at height from which he is wont to spread clouds over the broad lands of earth, whence he sends forth his thunderings and hurls his flashing bolts. He sent forth a thunderclap, and, poising his bolt close by his right ear, launched it against the charioteer. With one and the same blow he dashed him from his car and from the realms of life. With his own cruel flames he quenched the other's fire. The horses dismayed leapt apart, broke free from the yoke. The fragments of the wrecked car were scattered far and wide. So basically, Zeus has just zapped Phaethon with a thunderbolt and killed him. And this stabilizes the solar system. But we have more details about the death of Phaethon, and I've highlighted the key points in red. But Phaethon, with flames searing his glowing locks, was flung headlong and went hurtling down through the air, leaving a long trail behind, just as sometimes a star, though it does not really fall, could yet be thought to fall from the clear sky. Far from his native land, in a distant part of the world, the great river Eridanus received him and bathed his charred features. That's interesting. He's leaving a long trail, glowing trail behind him. Sounds like a comet to me. So this actually is a story which points to a very specific configuration, a conjunction pattern that occurred at a very precise moment in time. And the pattern in question, let me just tag it. I'll tell you the date first. I'll show you how it was targeted from a calendar perspective. And then I'll show you the pattern itself. This is the core alignment when the back ton readout was 3 back tons, 8th of October 1970 BC. And this is the time from which the Mayan people targeted the death of Phaethon event. And you know, when they were, they had the calendar system that Noah used, and they also used the 819-day cycle. It targeted the flood. When it reaches fulfillment, what do? Shut it down. They now resume use of that calendar system. They do not start counting straight away, though. They have a special pause period, a multiple of 96 days. They count 8 times 96 days, or 768 days. And this takes us all the way to the 14th of November, 1968. Then they begin counting cycles of 819 days. After they've counted 571, they land here on the 23rd of March, 687 BC. And this is the day of the death of Phaethon, when the conjunction pattern was established. Now, the genius of it is this. They don't just stop counting their 819-day cycle when they've got here, because their calendar harmonizes with the next end of age alignment. 27 more cycles later, they target the 7th of October, 627 BC, this core alignment. It's the same alignment as in the 1970 date. So you can see by having this special multiple of 96 days here, 768 days, and then you start counting your 819-day cycles, you harmonize with 2 end-of-age alignments. And I'm going to be giving details of both of these. But let's look at first the 23rd of March, 687 BC. If we look down at the solar system right on this day, what do we see? This. Jupiter, Venus, Mars, all lined up. And then Jupiter, Sun, Ceres, separately aligned as well. Now, at this point, we might also want to position ourselves at the center of Jupiter and look down the line, and we'll see something else of interest. The Pleiades star group. Here we've got Jupiter aligned with Mars and Venus separately, and then Ceres, the Sun, and the Pleiades all lined up. Again, it's that direction of the sky when we know we're going to get some disaster, well, usually at least. So this then is the day when the solar system went into resonant agitation. And you might be wondering, who is Phaethon? And the answer, Ceres, the dwarf planet, igniting to develop cometary properties. If we maintain ourselves at the center of Jupiter and just pull back a bit, we're going to turn on the constellations and look at the orbit of Ceres, who identifies Phaethon. And I've added a nice little cometary tail to him. Here is what we see. There's the Sun, there's the Pleiades, there is the orbit turned on in starry night with the center of Jupiter. So looking in this direction then, you've got Ceres stroke Phaethon right here. The cometary tails always point away from the Sun, so I've done an animation here. This is how it would look if it were really long. It is stretch away like this angle from the Sun. And if it goes all the way down here, what's this? What is this right here at the bottom? Eridanus. That's right. The great river Eridanus, for those that don't know, is a constellation. And what did Ovid say? His glowing locks, searing, long tail, he falls to his death in the great river Eridanus. From the perspective of Jupiter, it's his cometary tail falling into this constellation. That's the solution to it. Now, if we position ourselves at the center of Ceres and look to the sun and Jupiter, we will then see something interesting. Jupiter, by the way, is Zeus. That's the planetary identification. So let's have a look here. There's the sun, Jupiter stroke Zeus, this blob here, just next to Libra, this final star here. And what's this? Scorpius. And this here, the pincers of the scorpion. What did Ovid say again? When Phaethon looks across and sees the pincers of the scorpion, he drops the reins. At that point, Zeus unleashes his thunderbolt. There's the energetic agitation of the solar system, and Phaethon, stroke Ceres, ignites to develop a cometary tail. And that right there is the mythological solution. This is why you've got to look at these stories. They're pointing towards specific bodies in mythological terms, which are identified as specific planets with constellations as the backdrop. This is the precise day associated with the Phaethon story. But not only that, this very same disaster is also encoded in the Bible, in the book of Isaiah. Okay? And let me explain what this is all about. Here are the critical citations, because they give us some more details regarding the disaster itself. So the book of Isaiah then. Destruction of the army of Sennacherib. Now it came to pass in the 14th year of King Hezekiah that Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the defense cities of Judah and took them. So he's got his army together, he's taking all these cities, and then he ends up surrounding Jerusalem. So Hezekiah, he's the king of Jerusalem right there, and he sends his servants to Isaiah, you know, because he's desperate. What does the Lord God say about all this? And Isaiah said unto them, Thus shall ye say unto your master, Thus saith the Lord, Be not afraid of the words that thou hast heard, wherewith the servants of the king of Assyria have blasphemed me. Behold, I will send a blast upon him, and he shall hear a rumour and return to his own land, and I will cause him to fall by the sword in his own land. And we go further. The angel of the Lord went forth and smote in the camp of the Assyrians 185,000. That's 185,000 people. And when they arose early in the morning, behold, they were all dead corpses. King of Assyria, Sennacherib, departed and went and returned. Now, I'll just tell a little side note here, guys. The 185,000 is a fake number. It represents the number of days. The people who write these stories are clever, very clever. But that's another story. But let's look at chapter 38 then, just because this is where we get it here. In those days, Hezekiah was sick unto death. So he prays to the Lord. Go and say unto Hezekiah, Thus saith the Lord, the God of David thy father, I have heard thy prayer, I have seen thy tears. Behold, I will add unto thy days 15 years. But then in this next line, which is crucial, he says, And I will deliver thee and this city out of the hand of the king of Assyria, and I will defend this city. So this is exactly the same time he's saying Hezekiah is ill, and this is when Sennacherib's got his army outside. And then it goes further. And this shall be a sign unto thee from the Lord, that the Lord will do this thing that he hath spoken. Behold, I will bring again the shadow of the degrees, which is gone down in the sundial of Ahaz, 10 degrees backwards. So the sun returned 10 degrees, by which degrees it was gone down. In other words, we have an agitation of the axial rotation of the Earth. It slows down from its normal 24-hour-a-day rotation, and it ultimately speeds back up. Now, this action is exactly the kind of thing that could screw up eclipse records going back beyond 687 BC without the need to state that the Earth's orbital period changed. I won't need to say anything further on that, but that's all I need to say. So then, from the Exodus alignment targeting the death of Phaethon and the destruction of Sennacherib's army, This then, 23rd of March, 687 BC. I have told you that the Mayans were using this 819-day cycle back to 1970 BC to target this date. At Mount Sinai, following the Exodus, the Israelites were given exactly the same time cycle. Yahweh, right, the Lord God, oh, personally speaking, sorry guys, I believe that's an extraterrestrial, just my personal opinion, but he gave the Israelites, okay, some special calendar systems, the same ones that the Mayans were using, and he told them how to target the same date, and he did it in a very clever way. Now, what gives us, what the proof is of this is as follows. This here is a slide that somebody else used in their presentation, okay? They're Velikovsky fans. And I was, browsing the internet on YouTube, looking at some videos, and somebody was talking about all the different events that occurred at Mount Sinai, all the specific things that occurred, and they're looking at the timings when they occurred, just following. And so this is their slide. I'm just presenting it here. And in red, this is what they write. 3 days after third new moon following their departure, that's from Egypt, there were thunders and lightnings and a loud trumpet blast, and the Lord came down on Mount Sinai, and heavens did bow down, and the earth did shake. According to Hebrew tradition, all nations heard the roaring of the law-giving that heralded the start of the seventh world age. And it says at the bottom, W in C part 1, that's Worlds in Collision part 1. They're citing Velikovsky. So I'm looking at this 3 days after the third new moon and thinking, what does all this mean? Well, because we know exactly when the Exodus alignment occurred, we can evaluate this. And I did. I looked very carefully at this, and then it struck me. The genius of it. I understood why this was so important. So let's have a look at the new moon in question. From the Exodus then, if we go to the third new moon after the Exodus alignment, this is where the moon's right next to the sun. It's in silhouette, okay? The moon is between the earth and the sun. Now, we need to then go 3 days forwards from this, because this is right on the new moon. And if we do that, okay, we're here. The moon's moved over here, and we're on the 10th of July, okay? So what does all that mean mathematically? It means we've gone forwards 104 days to the 10th of July, 1457 BC. Now, at this point then, they're all at Mount Sinai, the Hebrews, right? And Yahweh's led them there. They've gone through all Red Sea and all that stuff. They're 104 days right here. And I'm going to tell you exactly the conversation that Moses and Yahweh had. I'm going to tell you exactly the conversation. And this is going to sound really weird and presumptuous, but I have no doubt in my mind what I'm going to tell you is spot on perfect. When they were at this day here then, Yahweh says to Moses, we're going to have another disaster, and it's going to occur many centuries in the future. So I'm going to give you a calendar system. Now, I'm going to tell you how to target flawlessly this disaster far off in the future. And Moses says, okay, what do you need me to do? And Yahweh says, we're going to start counting cycles of 819 days. The same calendar the Mayans are using, the other side of the world. The same calendar Noah was using earlier on. 819-day cycles, says Moses. So do we start counting them right now? We've just gone to the third day of the third new moon. Do we start counting them right now, says Moses? And Yahweh says, no. Before we start counting them, we need a special count of days. Okay, like I've been talking about how people have these little adjustments, these like 96 days, like, multiples. They have a nice little special count. They need it so that when they start counting their cycle, it harmonizes at the end point with the disaster alignment. So Yahweh says to Moses, the special count of days, he says, you will count precisely 6 times 6 times 6 days, 216 days in all. That'll get you to the 11th of February, 1456. Now, Yahweh will have been very specific about that instruction. He will not have said to Moses, I need you to count 216 days. No. he will have said to him very specifically, you will count 6 times 6 times 6 days. He will have worded it that way. You can bet your life he will have worded it that way. And there's a reason for it. Because now that you've got, it's all a clever mnemonic, you see. It's all a clever mnemonic, a memory aid. Now you're at this point here. You are 320 days from the Exodus alignment. You have now harmonized with the 819-day cycle that the Mayans are counting, the other side of the world. You've harmonized with it. So, in order to target the day of disaster for Sennacherib's army, you now need to count 819-day cycles. How many do you count? When Moses asked the question to Yahweh, how many cycles of 819 do I count? Yahweh didn't just give him the numerical value. He gave him the following very precise instruction. He said to him, Moses, you will count 7 times 7 times 7 cycles of 819 days. And if you do, you target flawlessly the day of disaster, the 23rd of March, 687 BC. It's perfect. This is why you've got all the memory. It's all about it. It's the 3rd day after the 3rd new moon. Then you're going to have the number 6, and you're going to multiply it by itself 3 times. 6 times 6 times 6. That's your special count of days. Then you're going to count some cycles of 819 days. How many? You're going to take the number 7 and multiply it by itself 3 times. 7 times 7 times 7. And from what I understand it, the number 7 is every Jew's favorite number. Jewish people laugh about the number 7 being their favorite number. I've seen rabbis joke about it, you know. And one rabbi literally said in a YouTube video, just multiply everything by 7 and it all makes sense. Well, I'll tell you, the guy was more right than he knew. There's a reason why it's the favorite number of the Jewish people. This is the reason. Now, so what I've given you then so far is a mythological solution and a calendar solution. But do we have any evidence of an actual disaster occurring on the 23rd of March? Of course we do. We have the observations, and Velikovsky cites them. It was apparently some cosmic cause that was responsible for the sudden destruction of the army of Sennacherib and brought about the perturbation in the rotating movement of the Earth. First, a more exact date for the night of the annihilation of the army. From modern research, we know that it was in the year 687, less probably in the year 686. The Talmud and Midrash give another valuable clue. The destruction occurred during the first night of Passover. The giant host was destroyed when the people began to sing the Hallel prayer of the Passover service. Passover was observed about the time of the vernal equinox. Then he cites another guy, the book of Edouard Biot. It's French, this, and he's citing some Chinese records. And the quote is, the year 687 BC, in the summer, in the 4th moon, in the day, Sin Mao, 23rd of March. During the night, the fixed stars did not appear, though the night was clear. In the middle of the night, stars fell like rain. The date, 23rd of March, is Biot's calculation. The statement is based on old Chinese sources ascribed to Confucius. In another translation of the text by Remusat, the last part of the passage is rendered as follows. Though the night was clear, a star fell in the form of rain. You know, like Ceres igniting to become a comet, that kind of thing. The annals of the bamboo books obviously refer to the same event when they inform us that in the 10th year of the Emperor Kuai, the 17th emperor of the dynasty Yu, or the 18th monarch since Yahu, quote, the 5 planets went out of their courses. In the night, stars fell like rain. The earth shook. In the words of the annals, in the night, stars fell like rain, are the same as in the record of Confucius dealing with a cosmic event on the 23rd of March, 687 BC. We have got the precise date, the precise confirmation of the disaster. See, if you're an astronomer and you're looking up in the sky at the planets and the Earth starts shaking, all the planets are going to look like they're going out of the courses, basically. This is what they're saying. And also a star fell in the form of rain, the ignition of Ceres to become a comet. So that's what you get there. Now, here we are. the story of how the sun fell in love. This is a romance story, this one. This is a clever one, though. So, remember I told you that when you're at the death of Phaethon, 23rd of March, you don't just stop counting the 819-day cycle, because if you count 27 more, you get down to the core alignment, that the pattern I mentioned right at the beginning, the alignment of Mars, Venus, Sun, Mercury, where the Earth's conjuncting the Pleiades. And this is on the 7th of October, 627 BC. In Ovid's book, Metamorphoses, what he does then, he discusses, well, the book I've got, I think, is about 350 pages. Page 60 is all about the death of Phaethon, and page 100 is all about how the sun fell in love. The stories are in sequence, and he recounts the story of how the sun fell in love as an event occurring after the death of Phaethon. In this case, it's about 60 years later. Now, this story is also recounted, how the sun fell in love, in part in Homer's The Odyssey. And I'm just going to quote a few passages from the Odyssey. This is the story. This is like part one of the story. Odysseus is at the court of a certain king, because he's the guest of honor there in one of the scenes in the book. And there's a guy who's got a lyre, and he's playing some music and singing a song about the gods. His name is Demodocus. Here is what Demodocus sang. It was all about the love of Ares and Aphrodite, how they first made love secretly in her husband Hephaestus' palace, how Ares gave her many gifts and how he dishonored the Lord Hephaestus' marriage bed. But, and here's the crucial part in red, the sun had witnessed their loving embraces and came to inform Hephaestus. But when he heard the bitter truth, went straight to his workshop with his heart full of evil plans, laid his great anvil on the block and forged a network of chains which could neither be broken nor undone to bind them there. When the snare was finished, he went to the room where his marriage bed stood and threw the netting right around the legs. A number of further lengths were attached to the rafter overhead and hung down like fine spiders' webs. Quite invisible even to the blessed gods, it was a masterpiece of cunning work. In other words, Aphrodite is married to this guy, Hephaestus, this other god. And he's this master craftsman. He's also known as the lame god. And he's spending all his time usually in his workshop, banging away with his hammer, knocking up all kinds of trinkets to be gifts for all the other gods. So while he's off down there, his wife is thinking, hey, I'm totally bored here. You know, husband's doing all this work. Hey, there's this Ares guy, this hot, exciting bad boy type with six-pack or whatever, you know, let's have an outrageous affair. So she's basically having an affair with Ares, and they're doing it in the marital bed she has with her husband. So husband finds out about it, and he's like, I'm going to do something here, you know. So he puts all this netting that he devises all around the rafters of his bed to capture them, and here's what happens. So he basically puts all this netting around the bed and makes a statement he's going to visit Lemnos, his favorite place on earth. So with him away, come, my beloved, says Ares to Aphrodite. Let us go to bed and find pleasure in love, for Hephaestus is no longer around. So Aphrodite desired nothing better than to sleep with him. So the two went to bed and lay down. Immediately the netting, which Hephaestus' ingenuity had contrived, fell around them in such a way they could not move or lift a limb. It was too late to escape. Now the great lame god himself approached, for the sun, acting as his spy, had given him word, and he hurried home in anguish, standing there in the entrance. They had both been caught right there, and he does this big yell, and all the other gods come around, and they're all kind of gloating, you know, that Hephaestus has caught them in the act. And there's a lot of conversations, but he eventually releases them. And that's like part one of the story. But what happens next is Aphrodite's revenge. And this is picked up in Ovid's book. But before we do that, let's do a nice little passage from Hamlet's Mill, because it's one of the books I mentioned at the start. They talk about this very affair, and they cite a Roman, okay, in their book, who appears to have something of an idea about this particular pattern. From Hamlet's Mill, Lucian of Samosata, that most delightful writer of antiquity, the inventor of modern science fiction, right? He once remarked that the ludicrous story of Hephaestus the lame surprising his wife Aphrodite in bed with Mars and pinning down the couple with a net to exhibit their shame to the other gods was not an idle fancy, but must have referred to a conjunction of Mars and Venus, and it is fair to add, a conjunction in the Pleiades. Very interesting. The Pleiades is a part of this, but the Pleiades is not actually in conjunction with Mars and Venus, not here. It's a slight variation on that. But let's just have a look what Ovid says about this. Aphrodite's revenge. In her turn, she, Aphrodite, punished the informer, the sun, wounding with like passion the god who had ruined her secret love affair. He who makes all lands glow with his fires was himself most surely aglow with a new kind of flame. Those eyes which should see all and range over the universe caught sight of Leucotho and were riveted on a single girl. In other words, the sun's going across the sky, minding his own business, bringing light to the world, and he happens to catch sight of this hot nymph chick called Leucotho on the surface of the earth, and he's like totally distracted by her beauty. And Ovid goes on to explain how this affects the sun. Sometimes he rose too early in the eastern sky. Sometimes he was later than he should have been, plunging into the waves. Lingering to gaze at her, he lengthened the hours of the winter days. Sometimes his light failed, and the sickness of his mind affected his rays, so that he grew dim, striking terror into mortal hearts. It was not the moon's orb journeying between him and the earth which made him wan by cutting off his light. Love was the cause of his pallor. All his affection was centered on this girl alone. So he appears to be slowing down, speeding up in the sky, and going dark. And Ovid goes out of his way to say it's not a result of an eclipse, but something more general. So what does the sun do? Well, there's only one thing for it. He has to go and declare his love for Leucotho, okay? So he disguises himself initially as Leucotho's mother just to get all the servants out of the way. Here's the passage. While night was taking its turn in the sky, the sun god entered the home of his loved one disguised as her mother, Eurynome. Leucotho was sitting in the lamplight with her 12 servant maids about her, very important, drawing out smooth threads with her whirling spindle. I have a secret to tell you, leave us servants, he said. So the servants did as they were told and left. And then he announces himself. He says, I am that god who measures out the path of the long year, who sees everything, and by whose light the earth sees all. I am the eye of the universe, and believe me, I am in love with you. Leucotho, though frightened by the unexpected sight, was overcome by his magnificence and accepted the god's embraces without a murmur. Well, the sun sees a conjunction of Mars and Venus first. You see, Mars is Ares, god of war. Venus is Aphrodite. The sun sees them embrace, so the sun sees a conjunction. Part 2 of the story, where we have the sun going all a bit haywire, the sun embraces Leucotho. But who is Leucotho? Luna, the moon, 12 maid servants, 12 months in a year. Okay? So what we would expect then, if we are dealing with this disaster conjunction of 627 BC, we know we've got this alignment of Mars, Venus, Sun, and Mercury. Mercury we're not looking at though. From the perspective of the Sun, part of the conjunction pattern is the Sun, Venus, and Mars. If that's occurring, Ovid's also saying to us, hey, why don't you position yourself at the center of the Sun and look towards the Earth? There should also be a conjunction involving the Earth and the Moon. Well, this is what we are looking at. If we're at the top-down view of the 627 alignment, we've got Mars, Venus, Sun, and Mercury. And you also find Jupiter's part of the conjunction, amazingly enough. This is the direction towards the galactic center. From the Sun to the Earth, this is the direction near to the Pleiades. This is the core pattern that I described at detail. Now, here's the thing. I've altered the time slightly. I've moved forward 11 hours and 10 minutes for the day in question, because this is optimized for the Mars, Venus, Sun alignment. Like I described previously, from the perspective of Mars, the minimum angle of separation is present between Venus and the Sun. So the adjustment is about 11 hours and 10 minutes to get us an absolute optimum from the perspective of the Sun, looking at this conjunction, the embrace of Aphrodite and Mars, and Aries, Venus and Mars. So if we maintain the same time here, then we position ourselves at the center of the sun and zoom right in on the Earth. Let's have a look where the moon is. It's right there. Right, there's the full orbit, and there's the moon, right there. And the moon is between the sun and the Earth, okay? So it's closer to us. So what is the error here in terms of the moon being in an optimum angular sweep separation from the Earth? And the answer, 1 hour and 44 minutes only. Now, there's just over 700 hours, 29 and a half days for every successive synodic conjunction. So we find simultaneously, when we've got Venus, Mars, and the sun aligned, we've got, the sun, moon, and Earth aligned. The perfect solution. This is what nails it for Ovid. You see, Ovid is a Roman poet, even though he's talking about Greek myths. He's a Roman poet, and he lived 43 BC to 17 AD. So he is talking about the last instance of this pattern that occurred from his own lifetime. This is the 627 BC one, right? That's what he's talking about. So that's that one. Now, what is the next end of age alignment then following 627 BC? Well, the answer is Crucifixion Day. That's right. The mystery of the crucifixion. What did Jesus say? The kingdom of heaven is near. This generation will live to see it all. There'll be signs in the sky. There'll be the sun going dark, moon going blood red. All that happened on Crucifixion Day. Crucifixion Day is an end of age transition day. Okay? Now, how do you target it? Well, the answer is very cleverly. You don't target it direct from the 627 BC alignment. You target it from the 687 alignment. Now, I'm going to show you the exact mathematics that Jesus was using, and this is a real mystery solved here. This is some top secret info here. I'm going to really decisively nail this, and this is going to sound very familiar. So, how do you target the Crucifixion Day from this alignment here? Well, you revive the 360-day calendar cycle, of course. You start counting years of 360 days. Do you count them direct from this alignment here? No, you have a special count. And how many days do you count? Well, lo and behold, you count 6 times 6 times 6 days, 216 days. How incredible, we've seen that before. Just before we started that 819-day count, the Hebrews at Mount Sinai, they had 6 times 6 times 6. That was a special little interval before they started counting the 819-day cycles. Here, we have the same special count before we start counting years of 360 days. So how many years of 360 days do we count? Oh, you're going to love this. 9 times 9 times 9 times 360 days. That's 729 cycles. That's the total number of days there. And if you add all that together and add it to this, you drop on this day right here, the 3rd of May, 33 AD. Well, is this the day of crucifixion? No. But we know exactly when it was. And this mathematics I'm showing you is absolutely the mathematics that Jesus was familiar with to target the crucifixion day, because we have overshot the mark perfectly by a very special number of days. As we all know, what's so special at crucifixion day? What happens? Well, how does the story go? There's this guy called Judas who betrays Jesus for some silver. 30 pieces of silver. Well, as anybody who knows astrology knows, in astrology, the sun is gold. The sun is golden, but the moon is silver. How many days are there in a month? 30, of course. 30. Just like there are 360 days in a calendar cycle, this ideal calendar cycle here, there are 30 days in an ideal calendar month. 30 pieces of silver, 30 days in a month. I can also tell you that on the 3rd of May, you're on a full moon. So what the Judas allegory is, and again, it's an allegory. There was no betrayal. There wasn't. It's an allegorical story. It's basically saying, when you've done the operations that I've just shown you here, go back 30 days. And if you do, you arrive here. 3rd of April, 33 AD. We've gone back 30 days, the Judas month. We're now at the alignment day, crucifixion day. And this is the end of age alignment, when all kinds of exotic effects are occurring. Now, as any Christian will tell you, when the crucifixion happened, it's supposed to have happened just before Passover begins, okay? So a quick check of a Passover calculator. If we are here on the 3rd of April, and we do a Jewish Passover calculator check, when is Passover for the year 33 AD? 4th of April, right there. 33 AD, 15 Nisan, 3793, 4th of April, Saturday. Flawlessly targeting. All Christians are appreciating this, I hope. So, let's have a look at what's going on in the sky from a top-down view of the solar system on Crucifixion Day. Look at that. Jupiter, Mars, Venus, separately aligned to Jupiter, Ceres, the Sun. You can also see Mercury there. But we can actually ignore Mercury as such. But let me just show you actually from the perspective of Jupiter, looking all the way down the line. You're going to see something else of interest. Pluto. This is the alignment from the center of Jupiter. We've actually got 4 bodies here. Well, 5 including Jupiter. Okay, it's Jupiter, Mercury, Ceres, Sun, Pluto. And then separately aligned Mars and Venus, okay? So let's just go back again. Here we are. Just ignore Mercury for the moment here. I just want you to concentrate on Jupiter, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, Ceres, the Sun. So one of the things I've been saying here in regards to this presentation is, when you get similar patterns, if you get a pattern that causes you disaster, and you get a kind of a similar pattern to it, or an exact match, could be either, you can get a disaster as well. They're comparable. So, does this pattern look familiar to all the viewers watching? Well, let me show you this pattern from 33 AD right next to the pattern for 687 BC, the disaster pattern for the destruction of the army of Sennacherib. Side by side, here they are. Bottom right, Crucifixion Day. Jupiter, Mars, Venus. Jupiter, Ceres, Sun. And 687, Jupiter, Venus, Mars. Jupiter, Sun, Ceres. Exactly the same bodies, only the order is reversed. But the power is still significant. We know that this was an end-of-age alignment for 687 BC. So we're going to have exotic effects occurring also 33 AD, which is Crucifixion Day. We also have this other very interesting thing going on the Crucifixion Day. Remember I said to you about Judas? What is Judas famous for? Well, obviously taking the bribe. But you know, when you take a bribe for somebody to be killed, we often refer to that as blood money, do we not? Blood is red in color. Does it not say in Revelation that there will be signs in the sky? The moon will go blood red, the sun will go black as sackcloth. Would it surprise you to know, ladies and gentlemen, what is also happening on the 3rd of April, 33 AD? A lunar eclipse. And what always happens on a lunar eclipse? The moon goes blood red. Let's see if we can see this. I want to show you a few extra details though. Before I do, let's digress onto this other little topic here. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a ram, okay? Rams are male sheep, and lambs, you've got ewe lambs and ram lambs, it's female and male lambs, are young sheep. And now we've cleared all that up. let's talk about a different kind of lamb. The Lamb of God. If you see to the left, here's a nice classic painting by Jan van Eyck, circa 1432. The Lamb of God, title of Jesus that appears in the Gospel of John. It appears at John 1:29, where John the Baptist sees Jesus and exclaims, "Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." Christian doctrine holds that divine Jesus chose to suffer crucifixion at Calvary as a sign of his full obedience to the will of his divine Father, as an agent and servant of God. Christian theology, the Lamb of God is viewed as foundational and integral to the message of Christianity. In this picture here, we've got the lamb stood on this box with like a wound, and it's pouring blood into this chalice. And we've got all these angels here, and 2 of them are holding up a cross. This is a crucifixion day scene right here. This is the mystery of the crucifixion, the Lamb of God. So we need to have a look at this Lamb of God. Where is this Lamb of God? Well, let's have a look. Firstly, 3rd of April, 33 AD. We're on this 12 universal time, 12 noon. This is the precise Julian day number. There's the moon, nice and silver. It's a full moon. We're going to have a lunar eclipse, but we just need to adjust it because at 12 universal time here, 12 hours for this day, we don't see it. We need to move forwards 2 hours and 51 minutes. And if we do that and zoom in on Starry Night, the moon is in silhouette going red at the bottom there. You can just see it. There it is. We've just moved forward from 12 o'clock to 14:51. The moon's now at its optimum. It's blood red lunar eclipse. So we need to see this Lamb of God. So all we do is center ourselves at the center of the moon, look towards the earth and the sun, and we see the Lamb of God. And here it is. Aries, the constellation Aries, the ram, the lamb, male sheep. What you'll notice then is I've put this blue circle around the disk of the Earth, as shown in Starry Night. It's total silhouette, so I'll put a blue circle so you can highlight it. I've put sun also, but I can't show you the sun because it's obscured. It's blocked out by the Earth. They're merged, you see. It's a lunar eclipse. But here's the key thing. Right at the optimum, if you take the angular sweep from the center of the Earth to 2 key stars in the Aries constellation associated with the head of the Lamb, Hamel and Sheraton, the angular sweep is practically identical for each of them, okay? This here is the Lamb of God. It's all about the Aries constellation being right there when the lunar eclipse is at an optimum. We've got this angular sweep associated with these 2 key stars at the head of the Lamb. The Lamb's being slaughtered, so to speak. This is the event right here, okay? Now, what do we know about Crucifixion Day? Did anything special happen? Yes. Well, we've already got the blood red moon covered. What else happened? Well, everybody saw it. Here's a nice little account. This is a guy from 1732 who wrote a book discussing what other people said even before him about the crucifixion. The Testimony of Phlegon Vindicated, or an account of the great darkness and earthquake at our Saviour's Passion, described by Phlegon. Phlegon lived in the 2nd century AD. And this guy's basically commenting all about it. You see, what happened on Crucifixion Day, when the lunar eclipse is at optimum, it went dark for 3 hours at midday. The sun went dark. Everybody saw it. And this guy's discussing it. And he actually discusses that somebody later on made a reference to the sun going dark, saying that like an eclipse. But obviously, then it got confused and people said, well, we can't have, was it an eclipse? It can't have been an eclipse. Well, obviously not, 'cause the moon's 180 degrees in the wrong place for an eclipse to even happen, because it's near Passover, okay? So people started saying, oh, the whole thing never happened. But it did happen. People saw it. The sun went dark. We had even reports of seismic activity. Not many, and again, we're in the ancient world, so the reporting isn't that, extensive as such. But we have it. This is because the solar system did go into a resonant agitation when that configuration was achieved. A match, albeit in reversed order of the celestial bodies, to the 687 alignment. Okay, the power, I think, was reduced. It wasn't as powerful as the 687 BC one. Power of the planets was reduced, but I think with the lunar eclipse, that kind of compensated somehow. But it was a very legitimate end of age alignment right there. So, got one further one to go before we get into the future alignments. This is the 1345 AD alignment, and this is the core pattern right here. You see, Revelation is split up into two basic parts. If you just forget the letters at the start to the seven churches, okay? The vision of John is split into two parts. It goes up to Revelation 11, where there's all these angels blowing trumpets and pouring out bowls of pestilence or whatever, yeah, all over the earth. And that's where you get these references to the moon going red and the earth going black as sackcloth. That's because they're talking about the end of age alignment. There is crucifixion there. Whereas 1345 alignment, okay, this one begins at Revelation 12 and onwards. There are multiple alignments mentioned there. Now, in the book of Revelation, then, we get some key details about this, but we also get a brilliant analysis of this in Luke. The Gospel of Luke is one of the best books in the Bible. The Bible stories are so sophisticated, so technically brilliant. They were written by a genius because they encode scientific knowledge of such an advanced type. Modern astronomers literally say it's impossible. So let's look at a passage from the Gospel of Luke. This is 9. And it came to pass, when the time had come that he should be received up, he steadfastly set his face to go to Jerusalem, and sent messengers before his face. This is Jesus. And they went and entered into the village of the Samaritans to make ready for them. And they did not receive him, because his face was as though he would go to Jerusalem. And when his disciples, James and John, saw this, they said, Lord, wilt thou that we command fire to come down from heaven and consume them, even as Elias did? But he turned and rebuked them and said, Ye know not what manner of spirit ye are of. Interesting passage here. So Jesus sends some messengers out to tell people, go and knock on some doors in this Samaria, say, hey, Jesus coming to town, and they're like, don't want to know. And so his disciples say, should we rain down fire upon them? No, says Jesus, not yet. So then we go forwards. Chapter 10. After these things, the Lord appointed 70 also. He appointed another 70. He's already sent some messengers, and he sends 70 more, and sent them 2 and 2 before his face into every city and place whither he himself would come. Therefore he said unto them, The harvest truly is great, but the labourers are few. Pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest, that he would send forth labourers into his harvest. Go your ways, behold, I send you forth as lambs among wolves. He that heareth you heareth me, and he that despiseth you despiseth me. And he that despiseth me despiseth him that sent me. So I can tell you straight out, if you look at the New Revised Standard Edition, where it says 70 here, it'll have a nice little asterisk, and it'll say, some ancient sources say 72. Well, here's the thing. The 70 is correct. The messengers from Luke 9 that he sent out on ahead, he didn't say how many he sent there. But we can surmise he sent 2 because they go in pairs of 2. So what he actually did was he sent 2 first, and then he sends another 70, okay? There's a really good reason for this, okay? So we might ask ourselves, who are the messengers that he sends? This is pure allegory. The messengers that go in pairs, the planet Mars and the planet Venus. So let's have a look at something to do with the orbits. Here's a nice little conjunction story. Here we are. Top right. These are the orbital periods of Venus and Mars, the sidereal periods, take into account precession. And this is the conjunction period when they reconjunct in the sky. 333.93 days. They're all in days, these. That's the conjunction one. So let's go to this little diagram here. Let's say we've got an initial conjunction of the Sun, Venus, and Mars at 0 degrees, like 12 noon. And we start the clock ticking. When do they reconjunct in the same order? Well, the answer is after 333.93 days. Now that is actually a greater time period than Venus's orbital period, 224 days, which is what it takes Venus to orbit around the sun once. But it's also a lot less than Mars's orbital period, 686 days. So what happens is this. When we start the clock ticking, Venus will go all the way around the sun, complete an orbit, and then go all the way into its second orbit and come to rest here, 175 degrees into its second orbit. So it will have completed, you can see here, 1.486 orbits. Mars, when we start the clock ticking, is moving so slow, it only gets all the way here, 175 degrees into its first orbit before Venus catches up to it. So we actually advance 175 degrees from one conjunction to the next. So guys, here's a pop quiz. If we start out with Mars and Venus in conjunction at 0 degrees, and we advance 175 degrees every conjunction, how many conjunctions does it take for Mars and Venus to reconjunct right back at the same point in the sky? Well, the answer is 72 conjunctions. This number right here. This is because Venus will have completed, as you can see, 107 orbits around the sun, and the total number of days that will pass is about 24,043. Mars will have completed 35 orbits, which is 24,043, same. And after 72 synodic conjunctions, the time here, we get the same figure. All three values are the same. And I'll also draw your attention to the fact that if you take the number 107 and subtract 35, the answer is 72. Now, what about this 70 business? Well, what is Jesus trying to tell us? What he's trying to tell us is, hey, I'm sending 2 messengers out first, then another 70. Because I want you to note that if we, instead of using 72 as a multiplier for the conjunctions of Mars and Venus, we use 70, we get this value here, 23,375, 23375. Turns out that that almost exactly equals 64 Earth orbits, right? If we take the orbital period of the Earth, multiply by 64, we get this value here, something like 1 day separate, very, very close. But there's something else. If we take this value that we've multiplied by 70, and we also multiply it again, I've reproduced it here, 23375. If we multiply it by 7, we get this large value, 163,627 days. Turns out that that is a brilliant harmonization to 1,860 Mercury orbits around the sun. If you take the orbital period of Mercury here, 87.97, multiply by this, you get practically the same value. So what we need to do is multiply by 70 and by 7, okay? And then we get the key value here. Now, am I just making that up? Is there some kind of source? Of course there is. A nice little parable in the Bible. Peter asks...
Actually, I'm sorry to interrupt here. So you've been going over 3 hours, and we really have to shut this down now. So what I'm going to suggest is that people go to your channel for the rest of this presentation. And I appreciate that we've done it this far with you. I'm sure you do have a conclusion that people will be interested in. It'll drive traffic to your channel and allow us to continue with our lives. Okay,
I didn't realize that. I'm probably looking at clock actually.
Yeah, it's way too long. So thank you, Keith, very much for coming on the show. Appreciate it. And you know, you've done a tremendous amount of work here. I can see that. Something weird going on with my camera here. God. All right. So what I'll do is I'm just going to close this down now. Again, do you want to give your channel out so people can find it? Do they just search for Keith Hunter on YouTube?
I'll stop sharing this screen here. Okay. Can you see me again?
Yeah, we've been able to see you the whole time.
Oh, I see. Oh.
You should have been able to see yourself.
OCCULTPHYSICS.com.
Okay, that's a website, but you have a YouTube channel. The YouTube channel.
Oh yeah, my YouTube channel is also called Occult Physics.
All right, very good. So we'll just put that in here.
Was the screen not like a full screen then when people were viewing it? You know what I mean?
I can't really answer that. You'll have to look at it later. All I see is what you see, which is appear.in, and it did have a you on it, as well as your PowerPoint, as well as the banner and the space for my picture when I was on the screen. So at any rate, like I said, thank you very much. If you want to have people contact you, do you have an email address you give out, or how would you?
Via my website, occultphysics.com.
Okay. Thank you again, and take care. And thanks everyone for watching.
Okay. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.